Welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
Thank you so much for joining us for episode 7, where we're covering chapters 38 through 43 of A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. But before we get started, please listen closely to our content warning. While we're focusing our discussion on chapters 38 through 43 and book 2, we are going to bring in themes, foreshadowing, lore, and other insights across the ACOTAR series. So yes, that does mean that these spoilers are spoiler central for all of the ACOTAR books. These ACOMAF deep dives do not, however, include spoilers for the rest of Sarah J. Maas's series, except at the end of every episode where we include our Maasverse Madness segment. How it works is we'll give a big old spoiler warning beforehand, so if you haven't read the Maasverse, you can leave the episode right there, no worries at all, or you can keep listening for Throne of Glass and/or Crescent City crossover callouts.
So with all of that said, if you don't know why the queens are grade 8 meanies who are bad, which is the nicest thing I'm going to call them today, then please go finish the series. We will be here when you're done.
Next, we at Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things about adult books. In other words, friends, this podcast is rated R, especially today.
Throne scene. I'm wearing my Throne scene shirt. I'm ready. You know the drill. This podcast is not for little listening ears always, but especially today. I'm feral. I'm so excited.
As we look ahead in both 2024 and 2025, we're so excited to be podcast partners at several live events.
We will be at LeakyCon in Portland, Oregon this July 5th through 7th. You can get your tickets for 10% off at the link in the show notes.
And we'll be at the Dragon Gauntlet event in Boyne City, Michigan this August 16th and 17th. We are also going to be at Romantasy BookCon in Los Angeles, February 20th through 22nd in 2025.
We are going to be hosting a live show at all of these events and participating in tons of other activities. Links to LeakyCon, Dragon Gauntlet, and Romantasy BookCon are all in the show notes.
Last thing before we dive into today's episode, if you love Fantasy Fangirls and this ACOMAF journey we're on together, if you want more content, more community, more events, and more, please check out our Patreon.
We have 2 membership tiers that you can join. The Valkyries for $5 a month, which includes our Boppin' Discord, live Q&As from Lexi and I, community events and a book club, promo codes for live events, plus 20% off discounted and exclusive merch, all for $5 a month. Or you can join the High Fae, which includes everything from the Valkyrie level, plus early access to ad-free episodes, our full episode outlines, and special voting privileges. They actually just voted on a new sticker/design that's going in the merch store today. I'm so excited. And that is all for $10 a month. Basically, our Patreon is the best group of people in the entire world, and I am not at all biased in the slightest.
Join the party at patreon.com/fantasyfangirls. The link is, of course, also in our show notes or YouTube caption, depending where you're tuning in. And really and truly, thank you so much for supporting us as we've turned this dream into our livelihood. It means the absolute world to us, and we appreciate you so much.
And now it is time to get freaky in the Court of Nightmares.
Nicole is going to open up this discussion with a summary of what happens in chapters 38 through 43. So gather round, friends. We need an Inner Circle Debrief.
Chapter 38. Heading to the rooftop because this townhouse can't get even more perfect, Feyre runs into Rhys, who shows her newest bling. It's a box of blood rubies, all with their heads on them. Oops. Sorry, Summer Court. Rhys blames himself for making the error and not wiping the minds of the guards so that they could sneak out unnoticed, and he's in a piss-poor mood because of it. Attempting to cheer him up, Feyre mentions going to a store that sells many lacy underthings, and that turns up the corner of his lips, and it turns up something else as well. Wink! Asriel interrupts the moment, though, and Feyre leaves, but continues to daydream about going to the store with Rhys. Things get steamy, heated, sexual, until she smacks into a wall, realizing, oh, it was Rhys who sent those images into her mind. Later that night, Feyre wakes up to darkness filling her room. Finding its source in Rhys's room, Feyre tries to wake him up, first by screaming his name, then slapping him, then sending her darkness out to meet him. The final attempt finally rises him from his nightmare, and then only does Feyre realize that Rhys is naked, and her traitorous eyes look lower to look at his knees, obviously. Look, whatever floats your boat, Feyre darling. She kisses him on the cheek and leaves, but not before turning around and seeing him kneeling before the bed, and she imagines a painting, and the painting sticks just like his naked body. Chapter 39. Feyre visits Amryn, who's working round the clock to decode this book. She brings the tiny Ancient One blood to drink. Delicious. Feyre thinks about her notes earlier with Rhys that she passed asked, aka the Prithian texting, about his tattoos that she saw on his knees, and she was checking out his body. The tattoos mean that he will never bow before anyone or anything but his crown. That's nice, Reese, but have you met Chapter 55? Montage! While waiting around for the mortal queens to respond, Feyre trains with Cassian and Reitz, struts the city with more, and hangs out with Amren. Oh, and continues a lot of Prithian texting with Reese, like a lot, and we love every single blue bubble of it. Finally, they hear back from the queens, and it is go time. Heading to the Archeron estate, the clock strikes 11, and who winnows in but the mortal queens? Surprise, bitches! Chapter 40. We've only got 5, though, because apparently the 6th is too ill to travel. Debatable. The queens say that they've known about this upcoming war for years. This news is so 100 years ago. When Feyre points out that no one seems to be acting this way in the territory, grade A witch queen Blondie says that it would be a waste of resources. You're a delight at parties, I bet. Nesta challenges the queens, saying that they can't abandon these people, and the queens are like, you're fucked! Unless Rhysand can prove to them that he actually has good intentions and that he's a good guy. Turns out that I did something bad reputation precedes him. The queens leave, and Elaine says they can rot in hell. Again, Elaine, I'm starting to like you more and more. Chapter 41. Returning to Velaris, Rhysand tells the Inner Circle his plan to show the queens their peaceful secret city. How do you ask? Through a truth orb, the Veritas orb, which is in the hewn city. The plan is simple. Az steals the orb while the others distract. And what a distraction it'll be. Feyre goes on an after-dinner stroll and looks at the artist quarter of Velaris, but she cannot make herself mosey in. She returns to the townhouse to find Rhys, who's conflicted to bring her to the Court of Nightmares tomorrow because he's a fuckboy there and doesn't want her seeing that side of him. Feyre is insistent she will play her role. Chapter 42. As they fly into the hewn city, they're attacked by ash arrows. Rhys tells Cassian to take Feyre to the Court of Nightmares, but Feyre, standing up for herself, instead concocts a plan. Let Feyre cook! Rhysand lets her plan stand. However, they find nothing. So they head to the Court of Nightmares instead, and it's time to make an entrance. All of our court makes their walk down the nightmare red carpet, and Feyre falls into her role of a heathen god's plaything to distract Kier. Yes, that is the plan. Sitting on Rhysand's lap, Rhys starts to feel up Feyre. Nicole, breathe. I'm so excited. And feels her up a little too much because Feyre is so soaked. But the mission's complete. However, on her walk down the nightmare carpet, Kier whispers, whore, and Rhys breaks his arm repeatedly. Chapter 43. Leaving the hewn city, Rhys winnows them to a beautiful mountain brook instead and apologizes for everything that just occurred. Feyre is furious, not wanting to be coddled or shut out in their anger. Rhys tells her that she needs to stop comparing him to Tamlin, which Feyre shoots back that no wonder he doesn't let anyone in because someone might walk away from him if he did. And she wouldn't blame them. Remind me to never get on Feyre's bad side. As they winnow back to the townhouse, Feyre knows she done fucked up. The next day, she goes to Amren, who gives her a little insight on how Rhys was when he came back from Amarantha and how Feyre's presence has brought him back to life. Back in her room, Feyre writes him note after note, but he does not respond. The notes will have to pause, though, because Feyre is then dressed for Starfall, which we will cover next episode.
My favorite time of year is patio season. I just love to soak up the sun during the summertime. And if you're looking to take advantage of sunny weather this season too, today's sponsor, Apostrophe, wants to help you feel confident in your own skin. Whether you're dealing with breakouts, signs of aging, or acne scarring, Apostrophe will help you love the skin you're in.
Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with an expert dermatology team to get customized acne treatment for your unique skin. Through Apostrophe, you can get access to oral and topical medications that use clinically proven ingredients to help clear acne. Simply fill out an online consultation about your skin goals, your medical history, and then snap a few selfies, and your dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan just for you.
I've been loving my experience with Apostrophe. The online consultation was so user-friendly, which I always just love so much, and thorough, but still quick, if that makes sense. And it's fantastic to have peace of mind knowing that an expert dermatology team creates a plan specifically tailored to me, my skin, and my goals. And best of all, no in-person appointments, which is just a huge plus for this busy mama.
We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/FF when you use our code FF. That is a savings of $15, folks. This code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/FF and click Get Started, then use our code FF at sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you so much, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this episode.
All right, friends, it's time to step into the cauldron and discuss key insights, character analysis, foreshadowing, theories, and so much more. Picking up right where we left off last episode, our crew has returned to Valaris from their summer court escape. Feyre fell asleep after breakfast and understandably slept till the afternoon because, staying up all night, shifting into another High Lord, stealing a book, and almost dying will do that to you. In an effort to chase the sun after several hours of reading her book, we've all been there, Feyre, she heads up to the rooftop patio where, lo and behold, Rhys is already lounging and drinking an amber liquor. My bet is whiskey. He really seems like a whiskey guy. It's probably, Pappy Van Winkle, 23 years or something hoity-toity like that. Fun fact about me, I know my whiskeys, or I should say I know my bourbons because I worked at a bourbon bar for a while in college and have such an appreciation for nice bourbons.
You and I have both been bartenders, and I used to love bourbon so much. And then I loved bourbon a little too much one day, and now bourbon does not love me anymore, which is really sad because I enjoy it so much.
I'll be honest though, Rhys is actually, well, now that I think about this more, he's probably not drinking bourbon. He's more like a Scotch whiskey kind of guy, which is a whole other ball game with the definition of top shelf. Like, you think bourbon can be expensive? Scotch whiskey is like serious. You got to drink that shit with a pinky up.
This is like the Prithian version of like Macallan, like 500 year or whatever. Like,
of course, it'd be 500 years, right? It's like everything in here is 500 years. Anyway,
Rhys jerks his head towards an empty iron chair that is on an iron rooftop table for Feyre to sit at. I love that these two like super everyday items are made of iron, which back in the mortal realm is a comfort and a safety to mortals because they think it's this fairy repellent. And even later in the garden, also on the iron furniture, Feyre thinks about how if only humans knew how little it affected Fae, quote, they throw away those ridiculous baubles and jewelry. Perhaps even Elaine would receive an engagement ring that had not been forged with hate and fear. This is just a PSA. Whoever ends up with Elaine, whether it's Azriel, Lucian, her damn self, I don't know. I just want her to get a beautiful ring that is made with love and hope, not hate and fear. And, maybe she'll buy the ring herself. And honestly, I kind of love that for her. I also love that this townhouse has a rooftop patio because freaking, of course it does. It has to get more perfect. I love it.
Rhys isn't up here drinking just because he wants to watch the sunset, though. No, he's brooding, but in an even more sexy way than our Jon Snow does. Why is our High Lord of the Night Court brooding, you ask? Well, the Summer Court, and more specifically Tarquin, sent 3 blood rubies, 1 each for Rhys, Feyre, and Amren. And in the Summer Court, receiving a blood ruby officially marks a price on your head. It is a declaration that a grave insult has been committed against them, and that you are now hunted and will soon be dead. Oh dear. By the way, I can't believe I missed this additional Summer Court info in last week's Suriel segment. My apologies. Here you go. I
also love that the rubies come in a box that is fashioned with a mother of pearl dagger on the lid. Yes. That's just like such a little extra, like, fuck you. I love it.
Well, this is certainly just not good news, especially considering how much our Night Court crew really liked Tarquin, resonated with his ambitions as a dreamer, and appreciated his open-mindedness to being the Night Court's ally, something very few courts consider given the Night Court's reputation across Prythian. We'll get more into that in a minute. Remember, while in the Summer Court, Feyre considered simply asking Tarquin for their half of the Book of Breathings, but she ultimately couldn't trust him as much as would be needed to make such a request. Rhys admits he considered the same thing and came to the same conclusion. He worried that Tarquin might say no and then sell the information that the Night Court was seeking the Book of Breathings to the highest bidder. He equally worried that Tarquin might say yes, but it would inevitably end up with too many people knowing their plans to thwart the King of Hybern. And this plan surrounding the Book of Breathings, it's too fragile for too many people to learn of it. Rhys stresses that he needs the why of their mission, their plan to nullify the Cauldron and stop the King of Hybern, to stay secret for as long as possible. He wanted to trust Tarquin, but unfortunately the risk was too high. This wasn't so much a reflection on Tarquin himself, but rather, one, the fate of the world seemingly rests on the Inner Circle's ability to unite the two halves of the Book of Breathings. There is no room for added risk here, telling anyone who is not absolutely trustworthy and necessary about their mission. They just can't do that. Number 2, the deep-set politics around the Prythian courts. Sure, Tarquin is a good guy, but Rhys couldn't 100% trust him. None of the High Lords can 100% trust one another. They each have their own agendas, their own histories, their own responsibilities to protecting their own people. And Rhys is no different. He has spent centuries putting on his Court of Nightmares mask, where he isn't a trustworthy High Lord. Of course he can't give the trust because he knows that he can't receive the trust.
Let's also remember that he has previously befriended another High Lord many moons ago. They were not High Lords at the time, obviously, but Tamlin, they were buds. And to be fair, it was not like we are the two best friends that anyone could have. It wasn't really like that. It was more like a mentor-mentee relationship. Tamlin and his family betrayed Rhys and killed his mother, his sister, and eventually his father too. Not a good look. Plus all of Rhys's distrust and bad blood with Baron. It makes sense that he does not trust other High Lords quickly, especially with information of this caliber. Not to mention, Tarquin is also young. He's inexperienced. We talked about this at insane depths last episode. We saw his poker face. Keeping the secret would mean lying to other High Lords who know how to play the game better than Tarquin does. And Tarquin is, yes, fiercely loyal. Would he have given up the book if Rhys had told him? Maybe if he told him everything around their plans? Maybe. I'm leaning towards yes, but it's still unclear. It is still a maybe. But would they be able to trust Tarquin not to turn around and tell others when he's interrogated, when he's asked, or if he needs to have a poker face? No, they wouldn't be able to trust him that way. So while it is shitty, and even a shittier thing that they got caught, I do believe 100% they made the right decision not to tell Tarquin about the book.
I agree. Like it's just kind of one of those where it's a little bit of a lose-lose situation.
Exactly.
Where they're just going with the best that they possibly can. And that really is representative of times of war. There are no great options during these really difficult times when lives are on the line, where the fate of the world is on the line. And they did the best with the information that they had available to them. In this moment on the rooftop, Rhys is beating himself up about his own shortcomings from this summer court mission. Instead of using his Damade powers to wipe the guards' minds that there were intruders stealing the book, Rhys relied on his Illyrian training to knock them out instead, making it rather obvious that once they woke up, they'd sound the alarm that the night court visitors took the book. He says it had been a while since he had to physically defend like that, and in the moment he only thought of his Illyrian training, not his other arsenal at his disposal. And yeah, this is an unfortunate mistake. I'm going to call it what it is. But as Feyre points out, it's not the end of the world if you do that every now and then. Hindsight's 20/20, that's for sure. But let's break this down. Rhys's Damade abilities were used as Amarantha's weapon during the 50 years he was trapped under her power. And in the summer court, after Feyre asked Tarquin about the temple to feel out if that was the book's location, Rhys used his abilities to distract Varian and Cressida while Feyre took care of Tarquin. But when a physical altercation came up in the case with the guards, Rhys switched to what had become most familiar in recent months. He's been training with his Illyrian brothers. He's been ruling over the Illyrians and keeping them in check. He's even hunted down and killed the Illyrians who sided with Amarantha. Since leaving Under the Mountain, he's been making up for 50 years of no training by focusing on his Illyrian skills, to the point where when a physical altercation came up, that was his default. Now, Captain Hindsight is realizing he made a mistake, not unlike what he pointed out to Feyre, about how she has these powers and needs to use them at the right moments. Do we fault our High Lord of the Night Court for this? I'm going to say no. We're not going to kick the guy while he's already down. But I love how Rhys is not exempt from making mistakes. They happen to all of us. And it's about how you handle the situation afterward, like owning up to them and drinking top shelf Scotch whiskey. Last thing on this knocking out the guards versus obliviating them, I have to admit, I was originally concerned when Rhys said that he took care of the guards. I thought he might have killed them. In fact, we were speculated it in last week's episode, but then we edited it out because then we just, read the next chapter. So anyway, it's comforting to know that he just knocked them out. All right, let's talk about why Rhys is so upset, pissed off, as he clarifies, about receiving these blood rubies and making an enemy of the Summer Court. Sure, feuds like what the Night Court just started can last centuries. And from a political perspective, this is a really tough blow, because if we've learned anything about Fae, it's that they can hold a grudge. That first night in the Summer Court, Rhys warned Feyre to be stealthy because they couldn't risk this potential alliance, and he didn't want to be on Tarquin's bad side. Ironic that it ended up being Rhys who dropped the ball on getting them out of there undetected, since of course those wards were going to go off in the underwater temple, which makes his frustrations at himself all the more amplified. He shot himself in the foot here. Again, it happens, Rhys. I'm simply pointing out his self-confessed observations.
And it's important to note that Rhys holds himself to an extremely high standard. I mean, all of the bad boys do, really. And him admitting that he failed a mission, it is extremely painful to him. Remember what lengths he will go to protect those he loves. And here he is thinking that because he chose the goodness of knocking them out over killing / obliviating them. He failed to protect his family and those he loves. And for him to openly admit, he's not verbalizing it, but he believes he failed in this moment. And boy, oh boy, are we going to talk about a lot of how Rhys views himself and the standard he holds himself to today. But I also wanted to point out that this is also him failing to meet a standard that he lives by.
Let's hone in on the fact that, courtly politics aside, Rhys didn't want to lose Tarquin's budding trust and friendship. He has been the bad guy among the court's high lords for centuries, putting on a mask of merciless contempt and violence, remember, think Court of Nightmares, in order to protect what he cares most about, Valaris and those he loves. It's one of the main reasons why a life with him will never be safe or easy. Being associated with the Night Court means you will be distrusted, judged, and even hunted. Rhys has had very few friends outside of the Night Court all these centuries. Indeed, like Nicole was saying earlier, one of his only friends had been Tamlin because they saw themselves in each other. And look how that friendship turned out. We'll get to Helion later on, but for the most part, Rhys has made sure of his bad reputation among the other courts and their high lords. It's a cost he's willing to pay for those he loves for Valaris. But Tarquin saw through this mask, and despite being warned against Rhys in the Night Court, he trusted his instinct and personal observations. Tarquin wanted this alliance. He wanted to be Rhys's friend and made that clear when the Summer Court hosted the High Lord of the Night Court. Both of these males are dreamers with radical visions of a better future for their people. Rhys admired and respected Tarquin for his beliefs and appreciated that a High Lord didn't view him with contempt like the majority did. I bet he also respected that Tarquin saw through the Court of Nightmares mask and came to his own conclusion about Rhys instead of blindly leaning on his advisors and the other court's opinions and experiences regarding him. To lose that, even if it was for the greater good, is a gut punch to Rhys. Yes, he's willing to pay this price of Tarquin's friendship and decent opinion about him for, quote, stopping the war and helping Amren, but it's at the cost of his own happiness and hope for himself, demonstrating once again, and certainly not for the last time, how self-sacrificial Rhys is. He will put those he loves above himself every single time. Fae-vorite admits that she now understands why Rhys did what he had to do in order to protect Valaris from Amarantha. She saw the destruction in Adriata and what Amarantha did to its people. And the last thing she wants is for that destruction to come to Valaris.
Which unfortunately will happen in the form of an attempted extermination, because unfortunately Rhys is going to make another mistake. I don't know if mistake's really the right word. We'll debate that later on, but he's going to trust the mortal queens with their knowledge of Valaris, and they will betray him. Something I also want to point out is you mentioned how Rhys will always sacrifice himself for those he loves every single time. Who does that remind us of? It is a direct parallel of these two, again, putting them as that equal in many eyes, but especially in the mate's fate's eyes.
Remember when she was first introduced to Valaris? Fae-vorite felt rage at this city and its people for being tucked away from harm when the rest of Prythian suffered for so long. She accused Rhys and questioned his decisions to protect only this city. And while that anger at both Valaris and Rhys fizzled away a while back, now she truly does understand his why. Because she saw what would have happened otherwise, which of course she wouldn't wish on anyone. The Summer Court High Lord, and all the others for that matter, didn't have the same opportunity that Rhys did because his city was already hidden and protected. So he took advantage of that one opportunity in a really shitty situation. In this moment, Fae-vorite is holding out her hand to Rhys in the same way he has held out his hand to her, metaphorically speaking, whenever she was ready to take it. She's offering up her understanding about Valaris. She's teasing him. She's thinking to herself, and thus probably letting it slip through the bond, come on, wink at me, play with me, just stop looking like that. She even takes it a step further by mentioning that lingerie shop. And when he doesn't bite, she stays. Again, metaphorically holding out her hand to him in a moment of need.
And this is a very interesting mood to see Rhys in. This is a bad day for him, Fae-vorite realizes. And it's quite alarming for us readers because we're so used to seeing that cunning, winking, hot, flirty, times a million High Lord. But here is someone who is just really pissed and having a bad day. Even him saying flatly, I'm not in the mood. Is this an asshole thing to say? No, I don't think so at all. Just like us humans, he's having a bad day. We can be fun and flirty and witty and still have bad days. Again, it is SJM making these characters three-dimensional. She's making them imperfect. And I just think that's why we love this story so much.
Absolutely. And for the first time, Feyre is not the one who needs comforting. And she recognizes that the tables, at least in this moment, have turned, and she wants to give to him what he has given to her. Not long ago, she was a shell of herself and not in the mood. But thanks to his playing with her, thanks to his staying by her side, even when she wanted him to leave, thanks to Rhys fighting for her, here she is, able to return the favor and poke him, trying to make him feel something. Which, hey, it works. As Moore will later say, is nothing short of a miracle. Because, of course, if anyone can possibly get Rhys out of his Jon Snow brooding, it's Feyre, his mate, his love of his life.
It's these moments that are, yes, very charged, but they are also the foundation of why this love story is so beautiful, because it's a foundation of friendship above all and wanting to make sure the other is always feeling better. And I just love that. I love it so much.
I love how you say friendship here, because yes, she will call him her friend later after the throne scene too. And like really, I'll say label him as that for, I think, kind of the first time.
Yep.
And you know that dangerous line of flirtation and trying to ignite any emotions to distract? Well, it's cranked up to level 10.
I'm in my element. I'm so happy. I love when he mentions, quote, "Am I supposed to deny that I find you attractive?" And Feyre thinks about all those times, quote, "when I dismiss them as teasing compliments and nothing more." Recall back to last episode with Feyre's jealousy and spiral thinking about every single one of these moments and dismissing them as nothing but calculated scheming. Here she is getting the confirmation of, no, those comments were earnest. So the flirting bar continues to rise.
Rhys tries to call Feyre's bluff, see if she is indeed bluffing about that Lacy Things store.
Quote, "Why don't we go down to that store right now, Feyre, so you can try on all those lacy little things so I can help you pick out which ones to send to Tarquin. My pulse! I love it!" I'm going to quote a lot of today's episode, just so you know. This, I know you mentioned like they kick it up to level 10. Fuck level 10. This is 20, no notes, perfection.
Then good old Azriel, the cock blocker. Definitely won't be the last time we say that. Like, really will not be the last time we say that. Poor Azriel.
Oh, poor Az. We love you. As Feyre walks away to give the Shadow Singer and the High Lord some space, her mind starts to wander to that store, realizing that she very well might have gone there with Rhys. And what might have happened if we indeed went there? How the shop owners would have given Rhys and her privacy while she changed into the red lace set she's eyed thrice now. Which, side note, I wonder if it's her who's eyed that 3 times or if it's Rhys who's eyed that 3 times and he's just projecting that into her mind. I don't know. But then she would have come out and Rhys would have looked her up and down twice. Then, without breaking her stare, he would have told the shop owners to come back tomorrow and they would leave the tab on the counter. Rhys would crook his finger and tell her to come here. And then she would walk to him between his legs, his hands grabbing her hips, leaning in to brush a kiss on her navel, his tongue. And then Feyre Darling slams into a wall. This is delicious. Did he infiltrate her mind? Yes. Is that a violation? Sure. Do I care? No. This scene is perfection. There is no grade that I can give to this flirting because there's not enough A+ in the world. Okay, I'm going to calm down. You talk now.
Okay, so you bring up a good point earlier because I have a question. Was this entire daydream, for lack of a better word, all Rhys projecting into her mind? Because I thought she was already thinking about it and he just added to it.
Oh.
Okay, so Liz.
No, I think it was.
What do you think?
I think it was him projecting into her mind because she was actually thinking about Tamlin right before then, and she was like thinking about how like it was a Dale story about like how, oh my goodness, like this is a dangerous line we're towing. I'm not super long after breaking up with Tamlin, yada yada yada, and then she's like, well, I could very well see what happened. So I think Rhys felt her kind of like retreat and like, oh, maybe this isn't such a good thing, and he's like, no, this is a good thing, babe. Like, this is a good thing.
That is so funny because here's what I think happened.
Okay.
While he was talking with Az, he peeked into her mind. Her shields were down, so fair game, and realized she was thinking about the Lacy Things store because, yes, you're right. She was kind of thinking a little bit about like the Tamlin and she was kind of thinking about that dangerous line that they're towing. But then she admits to herself that she probably would have gone to that Lacy Things shop. And so I think that's when he's like, oh, let's have some fun with this and just keep cranking that flirtation level up by taking the vision further. If I had to guess, he joined in the daydream when he would have looked her up and down twice. That's quite the detail. And it's only after that when the Lacy Things daydream takes a very sexy turn.
Okay.
So I think that she was kind of thinking about that on her own, but not in the same vivid like sexual fantasy. And that's when he kind of was like, okay, like, let's see what happens here.
I like yours better. That's my new headcanon. I'm duplicating that and putting that in my head. Yes, I like that.
Last note on this scene, I gotta say, I love how Farah is comfortable and at ease enough with Moore to tell her about the vision he sent into her mind. And that Moore laughed so hard wine came out of her nose.
Ouch.
Then Farah feels a small sense of triumph when Moore says she should be proud she managed to pull Reese out of his brooding, because that was indeed her goal, to make him feel better. And it worked, and she's proud of herself for that. Making someone feel better or making yourself feel better comes in all forms. Shopping for Lacy Things, drinking ridiculously expensive Scotch whiskey, staying up all night with your new friend. Treating yourself is so important in life. So why settle when finding a doctor? It's your health after all. Enter ZocDoc, the place where you can find and book tens of thousands of top-tier doctors, all with verified patient reviews. So don't settle, go to the best and find the right doctor for you. With ZocDoc, you've got more options than you can possibly imagine.
ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare highly rated in-network doctors near you and instantly book appointments with them online. Once you find the doc you want, you can book with them immediately. No more waiting awkwardly on hold with the receptionist hearing the music over and over again, thinking you're going insane. These are all doctors who have verified reviews from actual real patients.
We're talking about booking appointments from a selection of tens of thousands of top-rated, patient-reviewed, credible doctors and specialists. In fact, I just found my dentist through them. And the best part is the typical wait time to see a doctor booked on ZocDoc is between only 24 and 72 hours. That's it. You can even score same-day appointments.
We at Fantasy Fangirls are proud to use ZocDoc, and you should too. Go to ZocDoc.com/FF and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That is ZocDoc.com/FF. ZocDoc.com/FF. Our moment of sensual mind scenes are going to have to be put on the back burner, though, because that night, Feyre notices dark leaking into her room from the hallway. Quote, "I knew that darkness. A kernel of it lived in me." So without thinking, Feyre vaults from her bed, yanks the door open, and hurtles down the hall to his room. The urgency language and the "I didn't even hesitate" language here is so freaking important. Recall every night where Tamlin feigned sleep with her nightmares. And when she woke to his nightmares and tried to console him, he brushed her off and stalked away and sat like a little kitty cat at the bottom of the bed. So Feyre, feeling his rejection of her help, ignored his nightmares as well. So it just became this "I'm going to pretend if you keep pretending" situation. Here, she's not even questioning it. She's sprinting. She vaults from bed. She yanks the door open, hurtling herself in the hallway. She's sprinting to go help her friend. Finding his room, though, through the tether between them. It's been a while since we've had this thread tether language, and it is, again, yet another mate's clue. His room is filled with night and stars and wind, and Feyre finds his body, and, quote, "Around and around the darkness swirled, the beginning and the end of the world." It's not quite our no end or no beginning language, but it's close enough that I'm counting it in our count. So the count is 2. And this is now the second time that this phrasing is being used around Reese's power, which I'm clocking, and I think that's interesting. In the attempt to wake him up, Feyre shakes him, slaps him, and all while screaming Rhysand, his full name. Nothing works, and when she's finally beginning to bang on his adamant shield while still yelling, his hand shoots up, wrapping around her neck, and she goes completely still. So Feyre says, "Rhys," down their bond, and mentally puts a hand against his inner shield. This is when his darkness finally starts to shudder, not dissipate, but just shudder, which I took to mean like it's the wind, it's slapping around like crazy, and it just kind of stills a little bit because this is her. It is so apt that she's yelling his full name before all this, and finally her saying his nickname, Rhys, in that intimate way between mind to mind. That's what finally gets his darkness to change. It's so perfect. Feyre takes this cue to cast her own darkness out, soothing his and willing it to calm. Quote, "My darkness sang his own a lullaby, a song my wet nurse had hummed when my mother has shoved me into her arms to get back to attending parties." Delightful woman, Mama Archeron. Rhys previously sent darkness all around her during the training ring, reminding her that darkness is not all bad and that there is darkness that can be good and peaceful. Here she is using her darkness, which she previously did not know how to do, and showing him just the same.
She's not afraid of his immense and dark power. She's not afraid of him grabbing her throat. She knows she is safe with him. She knows she can trust that he won't hurt her. She shares a kernel of his power and uses it to calm his darkness, once again demonstrating how equally matched and meant to be these two are.
And so she says, quote, "It was just a dream," which pauses his darkness finally. Note that while this is a common thing to say when waking someone up from a nightmare, it is also the same thing he said to her when waking her up from her nightmare just a few chapters ago. And then, quote, "Like snow shaken from a tree, his darkness fell away, taking mine with it." Finally clearing the room, the image of a very naked High Lord is above her. He says her name and notices his taloned hand at her throat, and he immediately takes it away, realizing his, I don't want to say error, but realizing his gut reaction in the moment. She, not at all curious, drifts her eyes lower and her attention snaps to two twin tattoos on each of his knees. We will later learn in their Prithian texting that these tattoos are to symbolize that he will bow before no one and nothing but his crown, which Feyre will wonderfully remember those tattoos on a certain dining room table in chapter 55. God, I'm excited.
We're so close.
I 2 more episodes. Can you believe it?
I know,
was like,
I can't
oh my
believe
God.
next episode we actually find, it's like, oh my gosh, next episode is really big.
Next
And then it's
episode's
like the really
surreal.
big one.
I didn't realize that. And then I was like, oh shit, I need to start reading. While Rhys is taking a moment to rub his face and shake off his horrors, Feyre glances at her hands and wills shadows to vanish it, and then casting out half a thought, and the darkness scatters. Darkness powers unlocked for our girl Feyre. I love how in this very intense moment with Rhys, Feyre double checks that her powers are still with her, that this wasn't a fluke, that this wasn't an anomaly. This is so exciting for Feyre. Like we just mentioned a moment ago, when Rhys cast out his darkness in the training scene, she was not able to do it. And here is a moment where she needed to crack that dam and the water spilled out like crazy. And here she is checking to make sure it stayed that way. I just love that little detail. I missed that on every read until this deep dive. I was like, oh, that's so fun.
I even read that in the outline that you had written, and I was like, what is she talking about? And then I went back through and I read it, and it's like just like barely half a line in one. Yeah, it's very small, but it's a really important little detail there. Good catch.
That's SJM's MO. A super small line, and it's a really important detail that no one realizes until they deep dive it. Rhys, slowly shifting out of his partial beast form that he hates, apologizes to Feyre, and she finally puts 2 and 2 together. This is why he's staying at the townhome, not the House of Wind. I also will argue that he does love Valaris, and he does really like staying at the townhome too. But this is definitely the primary reason. He doesn't want his family to see these horrors that still haunt him. Rhys so badly wants to protect those he loves. We told you we're going to be talking a lot about it today. And he doesn't want to burden others with his own horrors. Rhys has had a very hard time letting other people shoulder the sadness and his PTSD that he's had from under the mountain. And I'd say very hard time. He has not let other people shoulder it, which is why Feyre is such a special person to him. While he might not tell her everything, which is okay from under the mountain, he opens up to her far more than others because she was there. She gets it. She knows what it was like, even though she was only there for 3 months compared to his 49 years.
Well, and when Rhys states that there are memories from under the mountain that are best left unshared, even with Feyre, he's not saying this to sweep it under the rug, like a certain other High Lord, or because he doesn't want to have an open, honest conversation with her. He's politely and respectfully setting a boundary to protect Feyre and not relive the worst of these atrocities. How is this different from Tamlin? Because he's willing to share most everything. And the reason he isn't willing to share this isn't coming from a place of, oh, she's too fragile and needs protecting, but rather these nightmares are his absolute darkest moments, where even Feyre recognizes that he shares enough horrific things, that what these nightmares must be are worse than she could possibly fathom. So she comforts him by touching him in a non-sexual way and offers to talk when he's ready. He doesn't brush her off. He doesn't excuse it. He doesn't double down on his no. He simply says, thank you. Again, illustrating the deep understanding between these two because of their traumatic pasts. They understand sometimes you can't voice the worst of your nightmares, but you still do have that support system for you when and if you are ready.
When we discussed why we love this book so much in ACOMAF episode 1, we talked about this parallel healing journey between Feyre and Rhys. And we as the readers, we up until this moment have been deep inside Feyre's head and thus her despair, her depression. But now that she is healing more and more, we're starting to open up and see Rhys's healing journey too. Feyre will note how exhausted Rhys looks. Again, Rhys has been keeping everything in, basically, at least from his family, his friends, and not really talking about the horrors that he endured for nearly 50 years. The fact that he's not even telling her this. He's talked sort of about his experience watching her get her neck cracked and die. He watched his mate, seconds after realizing she was his mate, die. And this is also something he's not willing to talk about. That to me tells it's like, oh God, this is horrifying. I kind of want to know, but also a part of me doesn't want to know what this is. Like I mentioned earlier, he desperately does not want to burden others of the inner circle with his PTSD from under the mountain because of the guilt and the hardships that going under the mountain in the first place put between them. But here is Feyre literally sitting before him as someone who understands, as someone who lived through it. Well, technically not lived through it, but overall, she's out of it alive. And someone who is healing herself from those same horrors. Her saying, if you want to talk, let me know, is huge because, well, yes, the others are there for Rhys if he allowed them in. It is insanely hard for him to open that up. So I just love these healing journeys and how they're really starting to come together. So Feyre reaches up, kisses his cheek, and thinks, quote, "How many nights had I wanted someone else to do the same for me?" My freaking heart.
I actually made an annotation during this whole stretch of chapters where the dialogue really speaks for itself. And even though we have plenty of commentary on everything, sometimes you just gotta let that be right there and just let it sit. And it's so impactful. Not even the dialogue specifically, but just her inner narrative right there. A line so simple has so much impact to it. And then a painting flashes into Feyre's mind. Unlike while watching Rhys and Azriel spar, this one stays there, quote, glimmering before it faded, but it remained, shining faintly in that hole inside my chest, the hole that was slowly starting to heal over. Wow. We've talked extensively about how Feyre's artist's mind, her pull toward painting, or even viewing the world in color and light directly correlates to her feeling alive. It was sucked away from her under the mountain, and she has felt void of this feeling since. We've started to see little glimpses of that spark coming back, where she's daring to think about painting for just a second here and there. Yet this is the first time that the image remains, filling in that hole inside her chest. And for the first time, she admits to herself that she is beginning to heal. Again, we've talked a lot about how she is taking baby steps on her healing journey and how the training scene with Cassian was pivotal for her. But now she's starting to truly realize it and even identify it as healing herself. In this past chapter, the roles between her and Rhys reversed, where she played and poked fun at him while he was brooding as her way of comforting him. And then, of course, how she comforted him out of his nightmare when it was her who had needed that sense of support for months. Why was she in a position to take on this comforting role with Rhys? Because she is healing herself and beginning to openly realize that they are helping each other heal past their individual and shared horrors.
This is also the first painting that flashes across her mind that will stick with her. Later, while she's looking into the Rainbow of Valaris, no, looking into it, not in the Rainbow of Valaris, she will think about how this is the only thing that has started that roaring demand to paint me, paint me, paint me. Again, she's getting closer and closer to the Feyre we know and love. It is time, though, to go to Amren's apartment, which is on the top floor overlooking the Sidra, and it's all one giant room. We love a studio. The carpets are worn, the furniture is scattered as if she moves it around often. I like to think of Amren not only as the major Sunball fan that she is, but also as a major feng shui enthusiast, because just all the things that she moves around, except for her bed, which is giant and stays in one place, as Feyre assumes. But there are all kinds of things spread out. Jewelry is dispersed on the dresser. Her fine clothes are hung on these open racks. And it is so not what we expect to see from elegant Amren, who wears and collects jewels like a fire drake.
We talked at the end of last episode how uniquely special it was for Amren and Feyre to have their own bonding experience. even if it meant almost drowning. But we see the strengthened relationship on full display when Feyre visits Amren at her apartment, which, to your point about how it's not what we'd expect, I admit I definitely was not expecting this to be Amren's apartment, like whatsoever. But after picturing it and, understanding Amren's character, it really does make sense. Like, she's definitely one of those people who presents herself very eloquently and all of that. And then in the background, it's just a little bit of a chaotic mess.
Absolutely. It is very on brand after you
Yes.
Yeah. Amren mentioned
I can just totally imagine how she randomly rearranges that furniture and how her wealth of invaluable jewelry is just splayed all over in disarray. That's kind of how my jewelry is too, but it's not nearly as fancy as hers.
Oh my God, I love you. Amren mentions how she's wanting to relearn the language prior to tackling decoding the book. And hopefully by the time she does relearn said language, they will have the other half from the human queens. She does say, though, it's been a long time since she's used this language. So was the last time that she used this language, was she talking to the Daglin? Oh, yes, this language I knew 15,000 years ago. I'm having to relearn it. Yeah, it would take a while.
I had never really thought about that, but I do believe you're right. Yes. And man, that makes us, where it's like, oh yeah, I learned Spanish back in high school and it's, been 15 years. It's like, I barely remember anything. Can you imagine 15,000 years? Yeah, I'd really have to brush up on my babble there too. Not that long ago, Feyre didn't want to know what it was that Amren drank. And now she is thinking of what Amren needs, bringing her blood, and even asking what her favorite kind of blood is, with genuine curiosity and interest. Again, it's the show don't tell way of saying how they've bonded and a certain fear of Amren has dissolved. Of course, she's still scared of her. Everybody is, but not in that same way.
To answer that question, Emma mentions how lamb has always been her favorite type of blood, but she will also accept goats too, which shout out to our other goat eater, Andarna. But humans tend to taste watery and like what they just ate. But this lamb's blood is again a fun nod to Sarah J. Maas's religious background. In the Old Testament, as part of Moses helping the Jewish slaves stay alive during the outbreak of plagues, he tells them to paint lamb's blood over their door and the plague will pass them over. Amren is our most closely related character in ACOTAR to religion, specifically with Judaism. And here is SJM making again that parallel with lamb's blood being her favorite. I love it. In fact, later in ACOWAR, the people of Valaris will paint their door in lamb's blood as protection against the pure form of Amren, who is doing an evening sweep of the city. It's so cool, all these religious parallels that I've never caught before because I did not know a lot of this before doing this deep dive. Except for from The Prince of Egypt, which shouts to that movie. It's so good.
It's been a long time since I saw that movie, but I feel like we need to do a rewatch.
Honestly,
brush up on our religion.
Feyre looks around the room and notices that Amren is using her blood ruby as a paperweight. Iconic. But it turns out it was not Rhys who earlier mentioned how Amren would see that blood ruby, now paperweight, as a green light to wipe Adriata off the map. It was not him who convinced Amren to not do that. Nope, it was a different set of jewels. On top of the dresser is a familiar necklace that Feyre saw in Tarquin's trove. At that time, she thought about how only a mighty female would be able to dominate the necklace. And it looks like Varian thought the same and sent it to the most dominating woman he knows, wrapped around her finger indeed.
At the end of this stretch of chapters, Feyre will be back at Amren's apartment and see this necklace on her bedside table as if she goes to sleep looking at it. And I just gotta say, that's so sweet.
It's something you really don't expect to hear about from Amren, but it's real cute. I love their love, so even though I feel like we don't know a whole lot about it. It's so great. But now we got a good old fashioned fantasy montage, which is weeks of waiting for the queens to deign to respond. But our girl Feyre fills her time with training with Cassian, hanging out with Amren as she relearns a 15,000-year-old language, shopping with more, reading, and training her powers with Rhys, who takes each lesson to sip some tea with the Suriel of his own and dive in about each of the High Lords who she, major air quotes, which Lexi will get into in a second, stole her powers from, and the politics, histories, and everything behind each of these courts.
So, yes, am I the only one who doesn't really consider it stealing their powers if they willingly gave that to Feyre?
That, right there.
Okay, so sure, they don't know that she took their power, and it's presently important to keep those powers a secret because they'd get very angry and potentially want to kill her. I'm looking at you, Baron. But that doesn't necessarily mean she stole them. Fae-vorite was dead at the time. She didn't exactly have a say in the matter. Anyway, I suppose it's semantics, as Fae-vorite would say, but she keeps referring to it as her stealing their powers. And I want to give you a little bit more credit than that, Fae-vorite.
I think that's a little bit of like Tamlin Lucian influence on her still. Like, because they were acting
yes,
right? Because they were acting all about like, my father would be so mad if he knew that you stole his powers. And it's like you're saying,
gosh,
she didn't have a say. She was dead. I'm pissed about it.
And yes, it's important to know who her powers came from. So Fae-vorite has more context and can better tap into these powers and make them her own. But I'm willing to bet Rhys is also telling her all of this because it politically makes sense for Fae-vorite to learn more about these other High Lords. Tamlin certainly never told her about these High Lords, at least in this kind of context. He didn't feel there was any reason for her to truly know their histories and learn about their courts. Again, that was him being like, why would you need to know that? You just go and sit pretty. I'm the one who's going to handle all of that kind of stuff. I know, right? But Rhys recognizes she's a leader. She's his equal. I'm not quite saying he's purposefully grooming her to become a high lady, although you could definitely argue that. But he is giving her the tools of knowledge for her political arsenal, just like he's giving her the context behind where her powers came from. He knows that she is going to be important in politics, whether that's as his high lady or as an emissary, but she does need to know this information, and that's really cool that he is sharing that with her.
Whenever Rhys is away on his own High Lord business, him and Fae-vorite continue their note passing, aka Prythian texting. Like on one day when Rhys is at Césaire on a meeting with the surviving high priestesses after Hybern's attack, during this outing, Rhys asks Fae-vorite about, quote, the painting. And I love how he refers to it as the painting, which means that they've talked about this before. This is just brilliant writing to make us readers feel like we're dropping right in the middle of a conversation with their close, intimate language that they've been sharing. When Fae-vorite tells him that there's not really much to say about it, Rhys says, quote, tell me about it anyway. This is like the hopeless romantic in me just becomes a puddle in this moment. I love it. What is so beautiful about their relationship is that they laid the foundation of true friendship before anything physical happens with them, which, don't worry, it will very soon. Might I remind you, we're covering the throne scene this episode. But Rhys asking her to tell him, even though there really isn't anything to say, it's saying, I want to know about your life, the fantastical and the mundane. It's like your partner asking you how your day was, and you tell them like the most boring story, but they listen anyway with intent and interest because it's about your life. You realize how important these moments are to you, and you realize how important she is to him in this moment, which, cough, Tamlin never did this.
So when I first read this question about the painting, I assumed he was asking about a specific painting.
Yeah.
But he's actually asking about painting, I believe just in general, Fae-vorite and her love for painting versus a specific painting based on her response.
I did not think about it that way. I always thought about it as like the painting, as if it was like the painting of him kneeling on the bed. Like I thought that was the painting he was always referring to. Because I
don't think so. But if you look at her response.
Agreed on the response. And later he's like, you enjoyed looking at me naked too much. Like, which to me insinuates like, paint me like one of your French girls. Like it's this moment, you know. But yeah, I think it could be read both ways, but I think you're right. I think that the intention is what you're saying is tell me about like your painting. Tell me about how it's going.
Or just like the painting in your life kind of thing. Yeah, a very general question there. And probably that he could have made it out that vague so that she could answer however she saw fit. And she answered in a way that was more general because she doesn't have a specific painting in mind right now. But that's total speculation.
But that does still stick with the whole, like, tell me about it anyway, where he's like,
oh, absolutely.
Like, I think that either way, the outcome is the same.
Exactly. Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. Yes. During this Prythian texting, we also get insight into Rhys's feelings about becoming High Lord when Fae-vorite asks if that's what he wanted to be. To which he answers, I'm just going to quote the whole thing. Yes and no. I saw how my father ruled and knew from a young age that I did not want to be like him. So I decided to be a different sort of High Lord. I wanted to protect my people, change the perceptions of the Illyrians, and eliminate the corruption that plagued the land. This directly ties right back into our ongoing conversation about how Rhys is a dreamer, a visionary, and that is why he connected with Tarquin and respected him so much. It also reflects the stark difference between Rhys and Tamlin. Tamlin, if you recall, did not want to be High Lord and did not expect to be, but he was the chosen heir despite having 2 older brothers. Once it became clear he was going to be High Lord because he was the one blessed with those powers, he was innately different enough from his father to repel many of the Spring Court nobility. They did not see him as worthy of being High Lord. However, that's not the same as being a dreamer and visionary, wanting to pave the way for a better future. Because Tamlin also fell into the tradition trap, where he stayed within the comfort zone of what is required of being High Lord. Yes, of course, he was very much against slavery, but there also was no any slavery anyway when he became High Lord. That was more of just a sentiment rather than a vision for the future. He's very much a that's the way things are kind of person, whereas Rhys questions the why behind the way things are. And if the reward outweighs the risk, then it's worth pursuing. But wait, what's this? The mortal queens have finally deigned to write back, and they've agreed to meet with Rhysand at the Archeron house under 3 circumstances. 1, no weapons. Never mind that Cassian, Azriel, Rhys, and Feyre literally are weapons. Number 2, the meeting must begin at 11 a.m. No earlier, no later. At least they're punctual. I'll give them that. And 3, they required the exact geographical location of the house along with the layout and size of each room. Security is an obvious why, but hold your horses, folks, because these mortal queens can winnow. After Moore asks how they can do this, the Golden Queen gives a small, mocking smile and says, "It is our secret and our gift from your kind." We know that the war from 500 years ago ended thanks to a treaty put together and signed by the 6 mortal queens of the time and the Fae. Exactly who these Fae were, we don't know. I am going to assume that these Fae agreed to give the mortal queens and the queens only the ability to winnow. Maybe it was for convenience, so the queens could travel from place to place as necessary. We know they each rule their own territory, but also they seem to have a collective palace, headquarters, if you will. So perhaps this gift of winnowing was driven by the sake of convenience. But I'm also willing to bet this power was gifted to them as a way to raise them up from the other mortals. What did Feyre say to Tarquin? That without magic, money is the only thing that really matters in the mortal realm. Well, with this magic, it ensures that the queens and their descendants always have the upper hand over their people. I'm going to also assume that this power naturally passes down among the descendants, though I'm not going to think too deeply into that because that raises a whole bunch of other questions, like what if a queen only bears sons or does not have any children, so the next in line is not blood related? We're not going to open up that can of worms, though. We're just going to keep moving on and just trust it.
Feyre is wearing a gown of white chiffon and silk with a gold diadem that is the sibling to Rhys's crown shaped of raven's feathers. What's on the cover of our book? It's a raven. It is interesting that Feyre is wearing white. White normally symbolizes purity, which is not something the Night Court usually wears or associates with, but maybe that's kind of the point. And it's also something that is associated with being very bridal. And given the fact that during our montage, Rhys wrote another letter to the queens, but this was a special letter, or as the queen calls it here, an interesting letter, or as she'll later call it, the plea. Just for context, here is what the letter said that finally convinced the queens to meet with Rhys. We might debate that in a second. Quote, "I write to you not as a high lord, but as a male in love with a woman who was once human. I write to beg you to act quickly, to save her people, to save my own. I write to you so that one day we might know true peace, so I might one day be able to live in a world where the woman I love may visit her family without fear of hatred or reprisal. A better world." That better world language is very interesting. We will get to that when we cover that chapter in Maasverse Madness. This is also long before Rhys will admit openly to being in love with Feyre to her face. My hopeless romantic heart is so happy reading this. I love here when Feyre wonders what was in that interesting letter. Rhys says, You didn't ask what was inside them. But I do have a question. Because of when it was sent and when they deigned to respond, we can assume that this is the letter that finally got the queens to arrive to this meeting. But we don't know that because they've also been in contact with the King of Hybern. We'll talk about that more in a second. So maybe they were like, oh, like this is an interesting turn of events. Let's go get some juicy deets of this lovesick High Lord to tell our, the King of Hybern. But however, did only a few of the queens read it, or only the old queen read it? Because the blonde queen who later gives them the book, we know her name is Demetra, she is not very kind during this meeting. I think I actually called her a bitch in my notes numerous times. But later she gives them the Book of Breathings. So did she not know? Did she just think on it and finally have a change of heart? How did this work?
I do think that they all read the letter. I think that would be pretty clear. The queens are meeting. They're figuring out whether they're going to go or not. Again, we'll get into some other context here in a second. But as far as why Demetria had that, I'll say, mask of her own, remember, they're power players here. And I think that this Golden Queen is putting on a mask worthy of the Night Court. And again, I'm excited to get more into that shortly.
Oh, I'm excited to get to that. Anyway, all of that to say, back to Fit Watch. Feyre is wearing a crown, which highlights that equal status between her and Rhys. I also love that the crowns are basically siblings between each other. This is Rhys not so subtly preparing her for High Lady, in my opinion. I know earlier you were like whether that was consciously or unconsciously. I don't know if it was conscious or unconscious, but no matter what, some part of his mind is preparing her for being of equal status with him, whether that is at High Lady or something else. Because we know that her wearing a crown is unique. The queens say something about how an emissary wears a crown. Is that tradition? And I love that Rhys's response is, quote, she certainly looks good enough in one that I can't resist. Dropping, again, those High Lady hints. While we're on Fit Watch, let's also do a quick Fit/Wing watch. Rhys is in his standard black and his wings are most definitely hidden. Even though he is coming from a place of peace with the queens, or at least attempting to, he is still wearing that mask of the High Lord.
Definitely. We will later learn that these queens desperately want eternal life and to look young again and young forever. But did you know that a pillowcase has anti-aging qualities? I'm serious, because Blissy's pillowcases keep your skin and hair moisturized. The secret is Blissy's award-winning 100% mulberry silk material. It reduces frizz, tangles, and prevents breakage. That's because it keeps the moisture in your hair and keeps your skincare products and natural moisture on your skin, whereas cotton literally absorbs it off your face. Say goodbye to wrinkles and dry, flaky, and red skin in the morning, waking up with healthier and shinier hair.
I love my Blissy pillowcase. And trust me, there are a lot of dupes out there that claim satin can be an alternative to silk, but to be honest, it's not the case. Satin is made of synthetic fibers like polyester, while silk is a luxurious all-natural fiber. Silk is breathable, moisture-wickening, and gentle. It's also more durable and long-lasting. Think of it as an investment in getting better sleep and waking up feeling ready to take on the day.
My whole life, I've really just been resigned to believe that when I wake up, my hair is going to be a mess. It's just been a matter of life. But my Blissy pillowcase keeps my hair from looking like a rat's nest in the morning. The smoothness of the silk is like no other. Sleeping on this Blissy pillowcase, it's elite. I love it so much.
Everybody loves them. They have tons of different prints and colors. They make a great gift because there is literally an option for everyone, and men love them too. They have over 1 million raving fans, and you could be next. So go ahead and try risk-free for 60 nights at blissy.com/FFGpod and get an additional 30% off. That's BLISSY.com/FFGpod and use code FFGpod to get an additional 30% off. Your skin and hair will thank you.
Today's Suriel topic is going to be the Mortal Queens, so we're going to save quite a bit of our discussion around them and what's happening behind the scenes with Hybern for that upcoming segment. But right from the get-go, we understand that 2 of these 5 present queens are leading the charge, the eldest queen and the golden-haired queen, who is the second youngest at around 30 years old. These 2 will also be the only queens who come for the second meeting later in the book to see Valaris in the orb. And the golden-haired queen, Demetra, will ultimately give the Night Court the book sneakily, but not sneaky. Notably, there are only 5 queens present, like I just mentioned, instead of the total 6. Vasa, the 6th queen, is said to be ill, but alas, she is not. Because you see, as of this meeting right here, the queens have already allied with Jurian and Hybern. It changes your perspective of this meeting when you take into account what the King of Hybern shares at the end of the book, that he sent newly resurrected Jurian to the continent to liaison with the human queens and convince them to aid in his cause. I'm just going to go ahead and quote this. "Wiser to work with me, my men, than to allow you monsters in the night court to rule and attack. Jurian was right to warn their majesties that you'd try to take the book, that you would feed them lies of love and goodness when he had seen what the High Lord of the Night Court was capable of. Also, the reason Azrael hasn't been able to infiltrate their courts is because the King of Hybern used his powers to protect them from prying eyes, a way to show the queens the benefits of allying with Hybern and that the Night Court is not as benevolent as they make themselves out to be. And for allying with the king, he will grant the queens immortality from the Cauldron's power, so they can rule their lands forever. Vasa, going back here to her as a 6th queen, saw through Jurian's lies and wanted to raise an army against Hybern instead. But the other queens were like, fuck that, we want power, we want immortality, so they sent her to a Death Lord to be out of the way. Oh, and cursed and enslaved. So with all this information now on a reread, let's examine this meeting with the mortal queens. There is no chance they are going to give up their half of the Book of Breathings. They've already made their decision and allied themselves with the very enemy that Rhys is warning them about. But they still agreed to this meeting. Why? I think it's to feel out the Night Court, to see what information they can get from them for their new allegiance, to learn for themselves what Jurian is talking about. Nicole shared what Rhys wrote in his interesting letter, his vulnerable truth of love and goodness. Meanwhile, Jurian was whispering in the Mortal Queen's ears that this was a lie. We're not even going to go down the road of Jurian actually being a spy, because that is a whole other complexity for another time. I have to wonder if the ancient queen's comment about having heard of Rhysand even on the continent was directly from Jurian. It would match with the King of Hybern's explanation about what Jurian shared about the High Lord of the Night Court and what he witnessed all those years under the mountain. Instead of truly giving Rhys a chance to offer his proof, I think the queens are setting them up to uncover weaknesses of the Night Court, since the King of Hybern has a target on Rhys and the Night Court. So as we were speculating earlier, we have to wonder, is the Golden Queen in on this at the time of the meeting and only changes her mind later? I like to think so. Perhaps she is in on the Hybern alliance as of this meeting, but Rhys and Feyre make her question the alliance and who is telling the truth, making her open to switching sides. I was mentioning, how she is putting on a mask. I do think that there is definitely a mask of politics, a mask of all of that, but in her head, she's more open-minded than she's showing herself to be. Then the Veritas Orb and Rhys's proof solidifies her choice and alliance, so she indeed does secretly give them the book. But we also have to remember that in the second meeting, the Golden Queen is just as vocally combative and unswayed.
So what if she's actually a spy and her and Jurian are working together? That's a crack theory, but honestly, it kind of makes sense. And it would also be more, the whole Jurian, I am the spy thing felt very out of nowhere. I'm really excited to get to it in the deep dive because I hope we can make it make more sense and make it, kind of point out those instances where we're really primed to believe it. But I think that him and Demetra working together would have this whole other believable level to Jurian being the spy all along. Now, does anyone know that she's working with him? No, because the King of Hybern kills Demetra in the Battle of Valaris, not Demetra and Jurian.
I will say, back to Demetra, just to kind of wrap this up here, this could all be her own mask of her understanding how to play the political game. These mortal queens, they are going up against the most powerful High Lord who they believe tortures people for sport. So they're going to come in with some backbone and show their own versions of power and strength to stand on any kind of equal footing within the same room.
We need to talk about Mor's reputation among the mortal queens, though, because Rhys introduces Mor and she walks up and the Golden Queen sizes her up. The Golden Queen, we will come to learn, is Demetra, like we've been calling her, who is a descendant of Andromancy. AKA, Andromancy is the mortal queen who Mor fell deeply in love with during the last war 500 years ago. So this meeting is a really big deal for Mor. She is not ready to tell anyone in the inner circle or anyone, period, of her sexuality. But by the writing, it does seem like maybe the blonde hair queen knows, or at least SJM is making the connections for us to see it in hindsight. SJM's a freaking master at that. Moore is not someone who revisits the past easily. So this is a very nerve-wracking meeting for her to be at, and to come face to face with someone who looks almost exactly like her love and who has a very similar spirit. Quote, Morgan, the Morgan from during the war. And we need to talk about this because that several words is really loaded. Yes, Moore fought on the side of the humans, but she also went with Miriam and Draken to free the slaves of the Blacklands around this time too. And she was a legend for doing that. But again, she was also in love with a mortal queen. So I wonder if the Morgan from the war is as much of a, oh my God, we're in the presence of a legendary warrior, as it is we're in the presence of someone who loved one of our ancestors. Maybe.
I wouldn't have expected the Mortal Queens to know anything about their love. And it's entirely about Moore being that legendary warrior who defended the humans and fought alongside them. But I will say she did feel when she was on the continent 500 years ago that she was safe to love Andromanche. So perhaps it was more open than I assume. I will say I'd still be absolutely shocked if it passed down in secret for 500 years. Like the queens would have loved to share this information with Jurian, and he clearly doesn't know. So right. I don't think that's something that they know, but I think more than anything that it is just SDM connecting the dots there for us as readers for the big reveal later on. Yeah. And also just really amplifying Moore as a legendary warrior who these queens certainly do know about. Totally separate, Moore says, you know that my gift is truth, so you will hear my words now and know them as truth, as your ancestors once did. Oh boy, here we are talking about her gift of truth again. Later, we'll learn that the Veritas Orb holds the same power of truth that is in Moore's bloodline. This leaves me with so many questions. I'm assuming that means part of her power of truth means that what she says is truth. There's no way to manipulate the situation. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole right now. It is not the time. It never feels like it is the time. There's just no answer. There's just too many questions about her power, and we can only sound like a broken record so many times. But it seems like this is one of the few times that she truly does invoke that power. Whatever that power might be.
I have more to say on the Veritas Orb and what this power might mean, but it is in Maasverse Madness, so I can't talk about it right now.
I'll be very curious because I have no idea.
Oh, God. I'm just as confused as you are. That's the long story short of it. But Fae-vorite gets down to business, telling them what they called this meeting for, which was to beg a boon, which I'm not going to lie. I didn't know what a boon meant. You can kind of infer with context, but where's the fun in that when we're doing a deep dive? So I looked it up, and it means a favor, especially one that is given in answer to a request. There you go. We all learned something today.
The Mortal Queens explain that they know war is coming and that they've been preparing for it for many years.
In my notes, this was the first time I wrote in all caps, bitch.
Now, this lines up with what we know about Papa Archeron being at a summit to discuss the threat above the wall, that the mortal realm on the continent, emphasis on the continent part, knows that trouble is brewing. These queens go on to say that defending this sliver of mortal land below Prythian would be a waste of resources, and that, quote, war is war. If we must sacrifice this tiny territory to save the majority, then we shall do it. With the added context that they've already allied with Hybern, this statement holds a lot more weight. War is war indeed. They are focused on protecting the continent and are willing to ally with the enemy to keep their land safe. Hybern is closer to the mortal realm in Prythian. What do these queens care if he takes that land over if they've got their power and immortality? They've chosen to ally with Hybern for their own personal gain, but it does of course extend to their courts as well. Hybern has already proven that he can use powerful magic to protect their courts. In their perspective, there is no reason to bother with the mortal realm south of Prythian. It's of no consequence or concern for them.
I also wonder if they know the stories of the Fae coming to their aid in the last war 500 years ago, and they think you're just gonna come back and fight for the mortal realm anyway, so why waste the resources? Which, if that's what they're thinking, they're not wrong technically. But I do wonder how much they know from the last war. Given that Rhys they believe is like the super wicked evil monster who melts minds, like you were saying earlier, I'm guessing they don't know his role that he played in the last war. Or at least they just know that, like, oh, the Fae came to help. They don't know which Fae, other than like Moore, who did have a super legendary experience on the continent with saving the slaves from the Blacklands. But I do wonder about going back to Rhys, like, he wasn't High Lord at the time. So they might also just not know him because he was not a important political figure at that time. Now, these douche canoes of queens continue to say their major air quotes reasoning, and the ancient queen ends many of her sentences with the word child, talking to Feyre. Again, in my notes, I wrote, bitch! And finally, after Feyre pours her heart out, they call her child again. Rhys finally speaks up, quote, do not insult Feyre for speaking with her heart, with compassion for those who cannot defend themselves when you speak only from selfishness and cowardness. Get it, Rhys. Oh, so good. But the queens use this insult as their line in the sand, saying that they will not give up the book unless...
Well, this rather unsuccessful meeting ends with the ancient queen demanding proof that Rhys is a male of peace. We'll get more into Rhys's decision to show them Velaris soon, but for now, I want to point out that Feyre also thinks of Velaris. Quote, there was one way, only one way to show them, prove it to them, Velaris. I'll say this, without the knowledge that they're already working with Hybern, this is fair. Rhys understandably has a bad reputation, and to the outside world, he's essentially flipping a switch here. It would make anyone question his motives, question his real agenda. So I'm not faulting the queens for requesting proof of his peacefulness before they hand over a very important artifact that has been safeguarded for 5 centuries. It's just all the other context that makes this meeting a big FU to the Night Court. And Prythian.
And the mortal realm.
And everyone. After the queens leave, we get one of the low-key most wonderful lines. Quote, and it was Elaine who sighed and murmured, I hope they all burn in hell.
In episode 5, we pointed out how Nesta was making vulgar gestures that Feyre didn't even know she knew how to make. Here is Elaine coming out with her own her own vulgarness, at least in Elaine's own way.
It's like when mom drops an F-bomb. Our mom, she's soft-spoken, she's so sweet, but then about once a year, she drops a perfectly timed F-bomb, and it is so impactful because you know she really means it.
I love it because, like, she did it one time when Brett and I were around, and we, like, both did a double take. We, like, looked over, we're like, mother! I couldn't talk though, so there it is. But also in that same episode 5, we noted how Elaine was the first to jump into action when the opportunity to help Feyre showed itself. We also asked if that was who Elaine is at her core, or at least who she wants to be at her core, someone who jumps into the line of action. Elaine is passionate about this mission in a way we really haven't seen her be passionate before. And now here she is with this line, I hope they all burn in hell, and showing that she might just fit in the Night Court a little bit better than we might think.
She comes off as this delicate, gentle-hearted flower, but there's a feistiness to her. And this is one of the first glimpses we really see of that. We'll get more of it in Frost and Starlight and then Silver Flames. And I know we say this often, but again, I'm really excited to be in Elaine's POV for the next ACOTAR book. I think she's really going to surprise us as we see her come into her own.
Agreed.
Once back in Velaris, we learn more about Miriam and Draken, who they are and their history. I shared a Cliff Notes version last episode, and while again, we are going to get more into them in our ACO War deep dives, let's walk through this info download. And apologies for any repetition from last episode. I'm just going to assume this really can't be said enough because of how much confusion there is around these characters.
I also love how Amaranth is like the gist of it, girl. She calls it a gist. And Lexi's about to go on a 5-minute download. Take it away.
In the years leading up to the war 500 years ago, there was a Fae kingdom located in the southern part of the continent called the Blackland. It was the cruelest place to be a human. All humans were slaves with no possible way of freedom. This territory was ruled by the Queen of the Blackland, who made Amarantha seem as sweet as Elaine. Yikes! Miriam was born into slavery as a half-fae, half-human here in the Blackland, and we understand that conception was against her human mother's will. Miriam was denied any rights to her fae heritage and shackled like any other human. Miriam, who was a slave, was given as a wedding gift by the Queen of the Blackland to her betrothed, a foreign fae prince named Draken. He was horrified by his fiancée, the Queen of the Blackland, and her delight with slavery, and he let Miriam escape. Miriam fled across the desert and was found by Jurian. She became a healer among his warriors and they became lovers. Completely separately, Prince Draken allied with Jurian and was injured in battle. Well, guess who tended to his wounds? Miriam. She learns that he broke off his engagement to the Queen of the Blacklands because, again, he was horrified by her, and he allied his armies with the humans, therefore that's how he's now with Jurian, and he had been looking for this beautiful slave girl he helped free for the past 3 years. In other words, he's been in love with Miriam. Meanwhile, Jurian was focusing on winning the war and defeating Amarantha. There was the whole thing with Clythia, who remember was Amarantha's sister. There are different versions as to the timeline of when Miriam broke it off with Jurian and fell in love with Draken, and where the Clythia pretend love affair fit into all of it, but bottom line is, Miriam and Draken fell in love and found out they were mates. She ended it with Jurian because of his ambition and bloodlust, and it drove them apart. And Jurian was captured and tortured to almost death by Amarantha. Everyone, including Amarantha, believed Miriam and Draken died while freeing her people from the Black Land at the end of the war. As we were saying earlier during the meeting with the queens, Mor assisted in this liberation and marched with the freed slaves with her friend Miriam. Miriam did indeed die during this, but was resurrected and made immortal. That's a story for another day. They let everyone believe they perished so they could escape and start over somewhere new with both their peoples, the liberated humans from the Blacklands and Draken's Fae citizens. They live in peace on a vast, luscious island in a forgotten, stormy part of the sea, hidden to be completely invisible from everybody else.
Again, just.
Yes, that is like, we're going to have so many more of these like little things because there's like, we get their story in lots of like little info dumps. So I'm just going to keep it going because if I just did the whole entire thing, that'd be its own full episode.
I was going to say,
I don't think anybody would understand what I'm saying.
I was going to say, eventually we'll pare it down and you'll do one of your masterful timelines and we'll make it like a Suriel Teatime or something like that.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we will.
I'm not going to lie though. It took me doing this deep dive this episode 5 seconds ago as you were going through this to actually understand this story. So thank you. And I do wonder with with Lucian's closeness with Jurian, if we're going to get more of his side of the story, you know, how there's that discrepancy. I'm going to be curious how that discrepancy works there. What a beautiful love story.
There's so many loose ends, and it's like, I have no idea how this is going to work out.
I trust SJM to figure it out.
All of this to say, it has no current weight on our story. But it is a great primer for ACOWAR. Because in this moment, Rhys refuses to bring Miriam and Draken into the fold when all they want is peace. Quote, they fought and bled and suffered enough for it. I will not bring them into this conflict. You're a good and loyal friend, Rhys. So, how does our inner circle prove Rhys's true intentions for peace? Well, they show them Valaris, because Valaris in and of itself represents what Rhys truly stands for and wants to protect. Interesting that during the meeting with the queens, Feyre realized that Valaris was the only option, but here, she's the one who asks what they should offer, as if she really hopes there is another option besides Valaris. You and me both, girl. Alas, there does not seem to be. And Amren realizes it when Mor barks, "What?" Amren hushes her. She's absolutely someone willing to do what must be done, even when it's hard. And that's certainly how Rhys is too. Quote, for his people, for the world, he'd offer the queens this slice of truth. Let's take a step back here, because this is crazy. This is a crazy big deal that Rhys is willing to share the secret of Valaris with the mortal queens. His ancestors have fiercely protected this city for thousands of years. He has personally done terrible things to keep the city hidden. It goes to show just how dire their situation is, how this is more than a matter of life or death. It is the way of this world as they know it, defending it from falling under evil for who knows how long afterward. He doesn't trust the queens, but he also recognizes that he has to offer up some trust in order to receive any from them. I'll just say it. He's dug his own grave by putting on the High Lord of the Night Court mask for so long that it's earned him a reputation, and now he has to undo centuries of that reputation in one action for the sake of humanity as they know it. It's an incredibly tough situation and not a decision he makes lightly. I'll be honest, I personally have feelings about how he identifies this as their only option after centuries of personally protecting Valaris. He's putting all of his previous sacrifices on the line for the greater good. To me, I have a hard time understanding why his character makes this choice when it goes against everything he has worked toward for so long. And while I do still have these feelings, I also have to come at it from the storytelling perspective. Like I just said, this really is his only option, and Rhys making this difficult decision to share Valaris with the queens illustrates how this situation is actually different from all the rest. The stakes are higher than they've ever been. Now, of course, hindsight is 2020, as we mentioned at the top of the episode. We know that this is a grave mistake because the Mortal Queens are working with Hybern and will sell out Valaris, leading to its attack. And this mistake that leads to the destruction of his city will haunt Rhys for the rest of his immortal life. He makes mistakes. He does what he feels is right for their salvation. And unfortunately, the gamble doesn't pay off.
And we should note, because one of the most common questions that people have around this decision is, Rhys is a Damati. Why doesn't he just like look into their minds and, you know, see if they have ill intent or anything like that? And the answer is because they fear it might trigger the intense wards/spells around the book. I do appreciate that is stated in the book, that like there's a reason why they can't use their normal way of, you know, scheming. It is because this is such a delicate situation, because if the book melts, which is what happens if it gets triggered, they're fucked. They're royally fucked if that happens. Does this decision to give up Valaris feel fast? Yes. Would I have preferred a passage of time where they were all putting their heads together to try to think of any alternative where they were realizing that and then they realized that this is the only one? Most definitely, yes. I would have loved some time with Rhys where he wasn't just like, we will give up Valaris, it's happening. And he was instead like really raw and grappling with it in a very raw way rather than like the masked High Lord of the Night Court way. We do get a moment where he's talking to Cassian where Cassian's like, well, we could just kill him and, you know, get smarter queens, which, wow, Cassian, what a Lord of Bloodshed moment. But they can't do that because A, it would take too long, and B, there's a possibility it might trigger the book melting. So I understand that we do have a story to get through, and I understand that this is a decision that they do need to make quickly. But this is also a huge decision, like Lexi was saying. And while I don't disagree with the decision itself, it would have been easier to buy into if we had seen our crew grappling with it a little bit more. It is also notable that Amren is surprised that Feyre wasn't enough to sway the queens to their side. Obviously, this is them not knowing that they're in cahoots with Hybern already. On a first read, it's kind of like, damn, Amren, ow, like what a sentence. Because we assume it's Feyre's presence and words with the queens as the Night Court emissary to the mortal realm. But on a second you realize that she's talking about Feyre and the love letter Rhys wrote. That wasn't enough.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't think that she knew about the letter that Rhys wrote.
I think she definitely knew about the letter. Because why? I don't think Amren is cruel enough to be like, Feyre wasn't enough. Like that.
But I think that I think that is what it was meant, though.
I don't think so.
Because
John, we're disagreeing. This is exciting.
Okay, well, how will they show the queens Valaris? Because those queens certainly are not welcome here.
It turns out there is an orb. The Veritas orb, quote, rife with the truth-telling magic Mor had claimed to possess, that many in her bloodline also bore. It is the size of a ripe apple. It is silver.
Wait, real quickly.
Yes?
I love how there's like that claimed to possess. Like even Feyre is like, I don't understand.
She's like, Mor's powerful.
Which again, like we don't know much more. Like that could potentially be a really big Easter egg, or it could just be, you know, Feyre's perspective. But I just had to point that out. The claimed to possess.
The Veritas orb is the size of a ripe apple. It is silver, and it is also known amongst the humans, and therefore the queens, when they look upon the orb, they will know it is absolute truth. How convenient to our story. It has also only been used just a few times in this entirety of the world. Big freaking deal. And it is one of the most guarded talismans. Where does it reside? With Mor's family in the Court of Nightmares. So the plan is simple. They will go to the Hewn City tomorrow. Cassian, Mor, and Feyre are the distractions to make the sudden High Lord checkup less sus. All the while, Az is going to sneak into Kyr's chambers and steal the orb. But before we go to the hewn city I'm feral to get to, it is time for a nighttime stroll. Feyre spends the evening walking in Valaris until she comes face to face with the entrance to the Rainbow of Valaris. Quote, compared to the sparkling lights and bright colors of the hill sloping down to the river ahead, the streets behind me were shadowed, sleeping. There's that sleeping language again. Here, the rainbow, it is awake. Life is there. And she's almost ready to go. That creative side is almost ready to be embraced. But then she thinks about how, you know what, it'd be pretty stupid to fall in love with such a beautiful place, not when it might be ruined in this upcoming conflict. Yikes, because a huge part of the rainbow will be a part of the casualties during Hybern's attacks. But while Feyre calls herself a coward here and does leave the rainbow's entrance unchecked, this is so very, I'm going to call it human of Feyre to do, protecting ourselves from getting hurt. So we make up these crazy excuses that in our mind, yes, make a lot of sense. But the second you voice them out loud, you're like, oh, that's a pretty stupid excuse, you know? But Feyre enters the townhouse where Rhys is standing in the foyer waiting for her. Wings are nowhere to be seen. Rhys is not even in the hewn city yet, but here he is nervous already for the mask that he has to don, and specifically for Feyre to see it. So Rhys tells her what's bothering him. He is debating asking her not to go to the hewn city tomorrow. And when she finally asks why, he says, quote, because you've only started to look at me like I'm not a monster, and I can't stomach the idea of anything you see tomorrow being beneath that mountain, putting you back in the place where I found you. Honestly, his worries are fair, in my opinion.
Well, one of Rhys's biggest fears is to scare Feyre off by being the High Lord of the Night Court. And they've come so far on this journey individually and together that he's terrified of taking 2 steps back.
She's only just started coming back to life, and she is still haunted, obviously not being able to go to the rainbow, to paint. Remember, she said not long ago in the montage text, that creative part of her, it is gone.
And not too long ago, Feyre accused him of, quote, what he made her do under the mountain. And that really affected Rhys. Here he is about to ask her to play a similar role, one that he knows she resented him for a long time. And he's just getting her to see him in a new light as who he really is, simultaneously while she heals herself. He doesn't want to jeopardize any of this that they've both worked so hard to get to.
But Rhys's vulnerability of debating to ask her to stay tomorrow is just that. It is an ask. It is not a demand. But naturally, Feyre's mind immediately goes back to nobody puts baby in a corner and being put in a corner regularly and keeping her away against her will. She gets triggered back to her time in the spring court with Tamlin. Not until Rhys mentions it being underground, though, does Feyre realize that, like, oh, right, I forgot that I'm going underground tomorrow. Again, this is going back to that part of the healing journey where after time has passed, those things that were once triggered are moving towards the back of your mind. And you almost, Taylor Swift style, forget that they existed.
Well, in this time, she knows that she'll be with friends. Cassian, Azriel, Mor, and Rhys. Quote, I waited for the panic, the cold sweat. Neither came.
Feyre tells him that she will help however she can, to which Rhys says, quote, the role you will play tomorrow is not a pleasant one. And unfortunately, he would know. He played that role for 50 years. He would do anything to protect Feyre or any member of his family from feeling that feeling. But unlike Rhys's time as Amarantha's whore, Feyre trusts Rhys, her friend. She believes in this mission and sees how pulling on a mask will help keep many people alive in the long run.
All she's wanted to do this book is help in an active, productive way. I'll say even last book, all she's wanted to do in the series, it is who she is as a person. And this is an opportunity to do just that. Help, be a part of the mission, actively work toward the greater goal.
Feyre changes the subject to Mor and why she looked so distressed leaving earlier, and Rhys launches into this backstory. We learn that after Keir sold her into marriage with Eris, Mor begged Rhys not to let it happen. She begged him because she had no voice, no rights, no choice in her husband or her future. But Rhys was not High Lord yet, and his father, who was the High Lord, did not care what Keir, his cousin, did to his offspring and his breeding stock. Cute. Great, my guy. So Rhys brought Mor to the Illyrian camp, and Mor made up her mind to sleep with Cassian and have him take her virginity, aka the only thing that made her valuable to her family in this arranged marriage. But we learn in ACOWAR that she chose Cassian because she knew it would mean as little to him as it did to her, or at least emotionally. And she could tell that Asriel, from his stare, he felt quite differently than Cassian did. Eris then refused to marry her, saying, quote, she'd been sullied by a bastard-born lesser fairy, and he'd no sooner fuck a sow. So her parents dumped her on the Autumn Court border with a note nailed to her abdomen that she was now Eris's problem. And Eris left her for dead. Or at least that's this side of the story. There's a lot more to the Eris side of the story that we don't know in our series yet, and it's actually killing me to not know this side of the story. Some people believe that Eris might be gay, and that's why there's so much of this tale that he quickly said, nope, the marriage is off, we're done. Or maybe him and Moore struck up a deal. Who knows? Personally, I love the idea that Eris is gay, bisexual, prefers males in some way theory. But we will get so much more into those theories when the time comes. We have plenty to get to today, don't worry.
Oh, yeah. I will say on that note, the way that he is so entranced with Nesta makes me question that theory.
But is he entranced, or is he like, she's a good political figure?
That's very true too. Yes.
I don't know. I'm so excited to get to that
we'll
part.
See.
Oh my gosh.
I really do think that there is more to the story, but I also don't think it's going to be quite like an Eris, like chapter 54 kind of redemption. We're just going to get some extra tidbits to it.
I think we're going to have more context. I go as far as to say redemption. I think we might get redemption level with Eris, but I don't know if it's going to be. It's not going to be like chapter 54 for sure.
Overall, yes. Well, anyway, yes, you're right. We have so much more to get to, and he will join our story way later on. We need something to talk about when we get to Silver Flames.
Truly. Feyre is horrified to hear that Chipper Moore, who laughs freely, went through such an awful experience. And we can't help but think back to that quote, there are good days and there are hard days even now. Don't let the hard days win. Moore is mysterious, yes, but she also has the embodiment of inner strength. And here she helps Feyre tap into her own, unknowingly. Doubling down on Feyre's decision to play this role tomorrow, wearing this mask, sit in his lap and be his pet, basically. This again just further cements that Feyre belongs in this family that will rise above all of the horrors, that is also bloodthirsty for those who hurt their own, and who will play whatever role they need to for the greater good. Let's travel to this hewn city. We're just building up to the moment. Rhys and Feyre.
Everyone's like, come on already.
Rhys and Feyre went out to just outside of the hewn city, which alarm. This is a big moment because Rhys winnowing here is how Royal Fuckface of Highburn was able to track Rhys and his powers. We'll talk more about that in a second. But we have a bit of time for people to come and hunt us down. So let's talk about Wingspan, baby. Let's talk about Wingspan, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Seeing Rhys's worry on his face, Feyre mentions how Amryn and Moore told her that the size of Illyrian male wings align with certain other parts.
Penises. They're penises. In case you didn't know.
You were like a kitty little 5-year-old. Penis!
You all remember that game where it was like in middle school where it's like you say penis and like you keep saying it louder and louder and it's like kind of a game of chicken? Yeah.
Which causes Rhys's eyes to shoot to Feyre. Yet she shrugs because she was told, or at least she says she was told, that Asriel's wings are the biggest, which
means he has the biggest penis.
We need to talk about that for a second. If his wings are indeed the biggest, with a certain amount of information that we have read in Silver Flames, if this is true, Elaine's going to be broken in half.
Well, if they ever do it.
After that bonus chapter, you think they won't?
I don't think they will.
Really?
Well, hold on. If they don't end up together, I'm not opening up that can of worms right now.
No matter what, if they do, Elaine's going to die. That'll be the end of Elaine. R.I.P. my girl.
She's got Fae healing power, so she's okay.
But they can't do a C-section. Do you think they're going to be able to part her? Playing along, though, Rhys says that they'll get the measuring stick out when they get home, which this is some big Wingspan energy. I love this about him. But also, this is the line that sparked 10,000 memes.
It never, ever gets old either.
Oh my God, it won't. Rhys's worry, now far behind him, takes a steep nosedive, which causes Feyre to scream and grip him tightly. What a move. What a play, my guy. And she tells him that as payback, she will leave him to rot next time he has a nightmare. She won't, though, because as Rhys pointed out, she liked seeing him naked far too much. Our duo is getting spicy here. I love it. But Fae-vorite is distracted by the silky tautness of his wings, and she reaches out and runs a finger down the inner edge, and Rhys comes in his pants. Oh, wait, never mind. Sorry. He shuddered because that is very sensitive. Sweet Fae-vorite is like, does it tickle? I fucking love Fae-vorite sometimes. But no, Fae-vorite, darling. It feels like your inner ear is getting breathed into, which Rhys happily demonstrates. Fae-vorite's response to it is, oh, which same Fae-vorite.
I was like, oh.
I heard it like, oh. Like, so Fae-vorite asks about these sensitive wings during sex. Naturally, Rhys is just living his best life right now, by the way. I just need to point that out. Rhys does admit that he has never allowed anyone to see his wings during sex. Yes, we will be on wing watch during that part too. Quote, it makes you vulnerable in a way that I'm not comfortable with. Thank goodness he will get comfortable with it, good sir, in chapter 55. Wanting to stay in playing territory, though, Fae-vorite says that it's too bad because you can get into some interesting positions with those wings.
Pause. Please tell me I'm not the only one who spent the next several minutes trying to use my imagination to think of those interesting positions.
No,
like,
you're not.
Like I imagine him like flying over her. I don't know. Like I think of maybe I'm just not that creative. I don't know.
You are not the only person.
I need the Illyrian Kama Sutra book.
Where's the Cosmopolitan for wing watch?
Oh, that just brought me back to high school.
Wow. Same. Oh my God. Rhys again is just living his best life here. He leans in to whisper into her ear, but something strikes out of the sky, which stupid interruption. I want to know what he was going to say.
Oh dear. We've got incoming ash arrows. Okay, so bro, this is not funny.
I'm sorry.
Why?
I'm just picturing he's flapping over me.
I know.
And like dipping, going up. Dipping. Oh, I hope our parents are proud.
This is when the SpongeBob thing 20 minutes later comes up so we can get our shit together.
Let's talk about attacks and death.
Okay, sunball. Okay. All right, but seriously, friends, why are these ash arrows such a big deal? Well, ash wood is the only truly fatal thing for fairies. Whether that is being struck with an ash arrow, ash dagger, or the like, prevents fairies from being able to use their quick healing powers. Ash stops fairies from being able to heal themselves, so the wounds can easily become fatal or give the attacker more time to fatally kill them. So there is a whole slew of ash arrows being fired at Rhys and Fae-vorite soon after they've winnowed to the snow-capped mountain range where the Court of Nightmares is located underneath. After winnowing to this area, Rhys has been in the process of flying Fae-vorite toward the mountain base's gated entrance. This is important, like Nicole said earlier, because it was Rhys winnowing that activated the magic tracker on him and helped these hybern forces ambush him with ash arrows from the nearby pine forest. We'll learn much later, at least I think it's like actually said in the book, or if not, that it is strongly assumed that it is indeed hybern who has a tracker on Rhys's magic. But we have to wonder, how did he wield this power to track Rhys? If proximity is required, which you never know with the King of Hybern, he's pretty fucking powerful and proximity might not be part of this, but let's just say it is a factor. How in the world did he get this tracker on Rhys? The only possibility I can think of is during the meeting with the Mortal Queens. They are already working with Hybern. What if there was a way that while they were in the same room, they put Hybern's tracking spell or whatever it is on Rhys? Because right? That was just yesterday that happened. So that's a possibility. But also at the same time, proximity might not be required. And the King of Hybern used his spellbook or the Cauldron to put this tracker on Rhys just very recently. Now, here's another possibility that some people theorize. The tracker isn't actually on Rhys, but on Fae-vorite. And the attacks come when she uses her powers, not when Rhys uses his. I'm going to debunk this theory, though, because we do not get nearly enough clues of her using her powers and the timing of these attacks for me to be by any means convinced of this. Like, I don't think that she uses any of her powers after he winnows them to this mountain here. So anyway, we're going to keep a very close eye on Rhys and Fae-vorite using their magic and how this alerts the magic tracker from here on out. Luckily, though, our bat boys are too quick for this attack. Rhys shoots to the ground, not winnowing, so he can figure out where their enemies are, and flying gives him more opportunity to scan the area versus, the possibility of winnowing, right next to the enemy. Asriel and Cassian have translucent blue and red shields encircling them, which is, of course, the magic they wield from their siphons. This makes the ash arrows bounce off of their shields. Phew! They're saved. But friends, this attack has Rhys pissed with a capital P. As he makes plans to search the area and hunt down their attackers, he orders Cassian to take Feyre to the Moonstone Palace, while he and Asriel track the attackers down in the woods. Record scratch, because Feyre outright says no, and pushes back that they should take her with them. Rhys is at first in ultra protective mode, but when she insists, he crosses his arms and waits for her reasoning, which, hey, she gives some good reasons.
She is familiar with ash arrows and can detect other High Lords, so it's possible she can figure out where these ash arrows came from. Remember, there's a bounty on their heads from the Summer Court. They think they might be attacking them, so if the ash arrows are from Tarquin's hand, she'd be able to figure that out. Plus, she is an expert hunter. We saw this multiple times last book, especially with the Midgard worm. Need to remind you that she is also the only one who is capable of catching a Suriel, even though Rhys has tried many times. Feyre even takes it a step further, organizing their plan by leading the charge and telling Rhys and Cassian to take to the skies, and her and Asriel will hunt on the ground. As she is talking, Feyre keeps waiting for Rhys to stop her, to reject her plan and insistence on coming, but he doesn't, and instead follows her lead.
Of course, we can't help but compare this to multiple times back in the Spring Court when Feyre insisted to come along on missions. This stretch of chapters actually does have quite a bit of Tamlin and Rhys comparisons, which makes sense as we're in Feyre's head and she's slowly starting to consider Rhys as more than just a friend, which scares her because she doesn't feel like she should be acting or feeling this way with someone else so soon after Tamlin. I'm going to be saying a lot of that should language throughout the rest of this episode. Back in the Spring Court, Tamlin would say no, and that's that. No possible way of convincing him. He wouldn't even let her finish her thoughts or her reasoning because only his opinion mattered. His word was final. No ifs, ands, or buts. Obviously, Rhys handles it very differently. At first, yes, he shows that same instinct to protect, but he has an open mind and willingness to be persuaded. And again, it works.
And in this moment where Feyre is growing her resume for High Lady of the Night Court, I want to point out that many people think her High Ladyship was too fast, which is why I'm really keen on pointing out all of these moments in our deep dive that have primed us for the big reveal. And arguably, this is one of the biggest moments. Not only standing up to Rhys, but making an overriding of his plans of action rather than being herded off into a corner.
Unfortunately, their search is not as successful as Feyre is convincing. The fallen arrows were snatched up by their attackers, and even Asriel's shadows couldn't tell him anything, as if the enemy had hidden from them as well. I think that might be, again, playing to how powerful Hybern is. In other words, the enemy knows who it's dealing with and is taking precautions to stay hidden. Quote, but that was twice now that they'd known where Rhys and I would be. The timeline here is interesting because we can gather that this tracking of Rhys's magic was not in place yet when the Adder attacked Feyre. Why do I think this? Because Rhys has used a lot of magic in the weeks and weeks since then. So we can gather that these two attacks were not from using the same location finding methods. We'll have to put a pin in this enemy hunt because, hey friends, it's time to turn our attention to another unpleasant bunch. The Court of Nightmares.
Let us first take a second and set the stage for this hewn city. While Amarantha modeled Under the Mountain after this city, Under a Mountain, her work was child's play because the Court of Nightmares, quote, was the work of a god. A true city with avenues, buildings, spires, home, a river that flows underneath bridges. This metropolis is carved out of dark stone that is the mountain itself. Every inch is carved in some, quote, lovely, hideous artwork. Etchings of dancing, fornicating, and more. But as you move towards the castle within this mountainous city, there are great scaled black beasts carved into the gates. Between the beasts are vines of jasmine and moonflowers. Yep, it is time for Plant Watch. Jasmine is interesting because that is the same smell as the smell of Valaris. So I guess we also have Smell Watch 2 embedded in this. Shouts to you, Claire Better, never forget. Jasmine, however, symbolizes love, sensuality, and grace, things we very much associate with Valaris and Rhys. Moonflower, however, which I definitely thought was a fake plant until I Googled it, means romance as well as mystery. My favorite part, though, is that moonflowers only bloom in the darkness. Feyre Moonflower, is that you? Side note, I love that Feyre thinks about the painting that flickers into her mind, and she calls it the Gates of Eternity. Like, that just shows you the vastness of what she's looking at. Now, how about the people of the Hewn City? There are only high fae here, with faces, quote, deathly pale and cold, probably because they very rarely, if ever, see sunlight, and no one smiles at her and more passing. Note that it is only high fae that dwell here, or at least that we're seeing through Feyre's eyes, versus the melting pot that is Valaris. It is also unsurprising that this place lacks any warmth, including its people, versus the radiating warmth of Valaris.
We also can't help but compare this less than warm welcome in the Hewn City to the knight strolling through Valaris, where everyone is comfortable around the inner circle, smiles at them, and treats them with familiar, friendly respect. And then there's here, which is quite the opposite.
Feyre's attire is quite familiar to us readers as well, being of the same cut and style of the panels of fabric that she was forced to wear under the mountain. But unlike Amarantha's Under the Mountain, this Under the Mountain is not brightly colored, which, side note, I do wonder if Rhys dressed her in like those bright colors Under the Mountain as like kind of a fuck you to Amarantha, who was always in color. That's my headcanon. Feyre's current outfit is black and glittering. Her hair is braided into a crown with a black diadem atop her head. Again, Rhys putting her in crowns at these public functions. Even when she's his pet, he's still saying, no, you're my equal. But there's more to this outfit being different than Under the Mountain than just a color change. This outfit, like joining in this outing, was Feyre's choice to wear, or at least she agreed to wear this. Remember back at the beginning of our ACOMAF coverage, where it was always the feminine outfits that sent a message that basically, people of the spring court, there is nothing to fear. You are fine. Look at our lady. She's so dazzling and feminine. But this is a very different kind of message, but it is still a message nonetheless. However, Feyre is getting to choose to send this message, playing a game, donning this mask, becoming this High Lord's plaything. Let's get into it. Are you ready? I'm so ready. I'm so excited. In the throne scene, in the throne room, Mor calls to attention of the court who resides in the throne room and, quote, I felt it, felt him. The very rock beneath my feet seemed to tremble, a pulsing, steady beat. His footsteps as if the mountain shuddered at each touch. This is the High Lord of the Night Court that the world has been primed to fear. The most powerful person who exists or has ever existed in Prythian. But we have a grand entrance to build up to, my friends. Cassian and Azriel enter, both clad in battle black with seven siphons on each of them. Remember, siphons are normally given to Illyrians that are only of pure blood, and they are normally only given one to handle their killing power. Azriel and Cassian have 7 each. I am also morally obligated for the Monica in Friends. 7. But 7 is a number that does frequently come up in our series. There are 7 courts. Debatable. There are 7 high lords. There are 7 levels to the library in the House of Wind. 7 is also a symbol in Judaism, meaning a sense of fullness or completeness. In fact, the word 7 is spelled with the same consonants as the Hebrew word for complete/full. Fun little fact right there. Then Rhysand appears. Quote, he had released the damper on his power, on who he was. His power filled the throne room, the castle, the mountain, the world. It had no end and no beginning. There's our no end and no beginning count going up again. Yes, it is now at 3. And yes, again, this is about Rhys's power having no end and no beginning. In addition, Rhys is also the definition of power here. He has no wings. He has no weapons. Quote, no sign of the warrior, nothing but the elegant, cruel High Lord the world believed him to be. Yes, he is wearing the masks of all masks. To end all masks of the world, there are no end and no beginning to these masks in the scene. So of course he has no wings, but the no weapons here is really notable. Rhys himself in this moment he's always a walking weapon, but he's really a walking weapon here right now. He can shatter minds, break apart many bones without even removing his hands from his pockets or getting up off a throne. Rhys doesn't need to show that he is powerful. He just is power walking into this room. And does Feyre shy away from said power? Nope. Quote, my blood sang at the power that thrummed from him, at the sheer beauty of him. Hello, mates/equal hint, once again.
So before Nicole launches into an absolutely unstoppable deep dive into this throne scene, let's quickly discuss the masks our Inner Circle dons in the Court of Nightmares. I can hear you groaning from here, friends. Don't worry, we'll get to the throne scene and all its glory in a second. We are seeing a whole new side to each member of the Inner Circle here. First, we have Mor, who you'll remember reigns over the Hewn City and Velaris. Rhys relates her to a queen, though I like to think of it more as upper management, and then Rhys is, of course, CEO, and Kira is, that middle management that thinks that he's important, but he's not. Here, Mor either ignores or smugly smiles at the sneers and hisses. She doesn't give two fucks that the Hewn City, where she's from, hates her guts. Because, hey, guess what? She hates their guts more. And she's more powerful, in a more powerful position than any of them, than all of them put together. She is, quote, a queen who bowed to no one, a queen who had faced them all and triumphed. When she addresses their audience, she speaks in a clear, cruel, and cunning tone. This is not the chipper, overly friendly Mor we've come to know and love. No, this is a whole other side to her, where she is still in her element, embracing her power and superiority over these people who thought and still do think her as less than for so long. Then we have Cassian and Azriel, who have all 7 of their siphons on full display. They are the most powerful Illyrians that ever existed, and they want to be sure no one forgets that. These two, especially Azriel, have a personal vendetta against these Fae in the Hewn City after what they did to Mor all those centuries ago. They are the cruel High Lord of the Night Court's war commander and spy master. Of course, they're cruel and dangerous and powerful in their own right, and they are owning it right now. This is not the familial Inner Circle Feyre has come to know and appreciate. These are the High Lord's entourage, and wow, do they play their parts well. But actually, I want to challenge this notion that they are playing parts and putting on masks. Yes, of course they are to an extent. But each of their roles here isn't necessarily just a mask. And I'm speaking about Cassian, Azriel, and Mor here. This is also who they are, what they're capable of, and what they're good at. It's hard for Mor to go to the Hewn City, yes. And she also gets to rub in their faces that she did triumph over all of them and they are under her control now. Az and Cassian really want their revenge on the Hewn City, and this is another side of who they are. Warriors in their own right, more powerful than these Fae who value pure-bloodedness. Finally, we have Rhys, who I will definitely say is putting on the biggest mask of all as the cruel High Lord of the Night Court. Like we were saying earlier, he doesn't want Feyre to see the side of him, the monster that he has to be in the Court of Nightmares. Feyre will assure him in the scene that she sees the real Rhys, knows the male beneath this mask, and that she's not afraid of who he's having to be here, which is something he kind of needs to hear as he plays his part. Nicole will definitely get into that more here in a moment. Ultimately, Rhys cares deeply for the innocent and wants peace. But that is not what the Court of Nightmares is about. And in order to protect the innocent, he has to don this mask of cruelty and contempt. There's very much a black and white, good versus evil difference between the Hewn City and Velaris. I have to wonder what other dreamers are born in the Court of Nightmares and if they ever have a chance to get out too, and if he's aware of any of that, but that's speculation for another day. Then, of course, we have Feyre's mask as the High Lord's plaything. She is embracing this role because the purpose of their trip to the Hewn City is to steal the Veritas Orb, and in order for Azriel to sneakily snatch it, they need a distraction, a big distraction. Feyre is that distraction, and it works pretty damn well. There are a lot of rumors buzzing around Prythian about Feyre and her presence now in the Night Court. The Court of Nightmares is about to see how she seemingly fits in with their own eyes. Feyre is putting on this mask and owning this role as Rhys's pet because she recognizes how vital it is to their greater mission. She has a self-assuredness, plus of course trust in Rhys and knowing who he really is, to fully understand that this is only pretend, empowering her to lean into this facade and own it. Okay, I'm done. Continue, Nicole.
Rhys makes his way to a bowing Fae-rite, and not looking at his entire bowing court, he tilts her chin up to meet his face and urge her to come with him. Yeah, he does. Quote, Rhys dragged his eyes over me, and I wondered if it wasn't entirely for show as they glazed a bit. I am feral. I'm so excited. They are both playing a game. Yes, they're wearing their masks, but as we are about to walk through in excruciating detail, they will also get finally a chance to let out their sexual tension. They've been flirting like crazy, and this is finally an excuse for them to get it out and have it safely masked behind, this is for the good of the mission. We're distracting each other, right? They don't have to worry or second guess about rejection or anything like that, or this being dangerous territory. And here we're getting these little hints that he's not going to enjoy Fae-rite wearing this mask and all this kind of stuff. He is also a mate and a male getting to fully openly ogle at the woman he loves, finally. So, guiding her to sit on his lap on a throne, their game officially begins. Let the throne scene commence! But you know what I think Asriel would love, Lexi?
What, Nicole?
True crime stories. But if you, like Asriel, are also on the lookout for true crime stories told from a fresh perspective with nuance, depth, and detail, we have a new show for you. Check out Murder, True Crime Stories, a Crime House original podcast. From the shocking Sandra Levy case to the infamous Tylenol murders to the tragic deaths of the Clutter family, each episode focuses on a famous solved or unsolved murder case.
I love a murder mystery story. I love trying to figure out who did it along with the story. And then, of course, I equally do love getting humbled when I was way off when the culprit is finally revealed, which is why we're so excited for this new show from Crime House.
Listen every Tuesday as the show dives into the darkest corners of true crime, unraveling chilling narratives, examining compelling clues, and most importantly, seeking the truth. Maybe they have their own Veritas orb on this podcast. There's a story behind every murder, but is there an ending?
New episodes of Murder, True Crime Stories release every Tuesday. Just search for Murder, True Crime Stories on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out.
Let's do this. I'm so excited. All right. Rhys slides his hands down Farrah's bare waist and thigh while everyone in the throne room is still bowed. What a move. Side note, I love the moment where she almost yelps because his hands are so cold, and then he warms them and then slides his hand across her thigh as if to say, sorry.
It's a nice little reminder of their relationship and his care for her beneath this mask. While we're getting a lot of similarities from the Under the Mountain parties, there is ultimately more differences than similarities that SJM is blatantly calling attention to. So we readers clearly identify how this is entirely different.
Yeah. Rhys begins their throne debauchery by telling her to not let the fact that every male is contemplating what they do to get her blood red painted mouth on them. Feyre waits for herself to become shy or to blush, but nothing comes. Well, debatable, but our girl has come so far in her own self-assuredness in this past year. Think back to ACOTAR, where she wears a dress to dinner at the spring court for the first time. She's nervous. She's self-conscious. And then Under the Mountain, she would wear these outfits. She was embarrassed. She was ashamed by what she was forced to do. Not to say that the same male is the person, but we're not looking at that at this moment. Now she's wearing the same outfit. She's perched on that same male's lap who made her dance for him, but she is a different person.
In a situation where she has control and choice, even if her mask kind of says otherwise.
Quote, but I was beautiful. I was strong. I had survived. Get it, girl. Get it, Feyre. As Rhys continues to touch Feyre's body, his hands move from her thigh to the inside of her knee. You're going the wrong way, sir. But Feyre leans into the touch more and more. Like I mentioned, these two have been dancing around their flirting banter for months. And whenever it gets too much to the point where like, ooh, something might happen zone, Feyre thinks about how we're getting into dangerous territory. Even in the sky earlier, she was definitely thinking dangerous territory. But Feyre does not think that at all, the dangerous territory specifically during the scene. In fact, just like we got Rhys looking at Feyre all hungrily, now with her leaning back into his touch more, this is Feyre meeting with that same desire, letting him know, I'm kind of into this. Rhys dismisses his court, allowing them to rise and go back to their courtly ways. They're grinding against each other to the music that is throbbing, ancient, and wild. What kind of high school homecoming from the 2000s is this?
Till sweat drop down my balls. Oh, these bitches. Skeet, motherfucker.
Oh, you just took me back. But Rhys commands Kier to come over, and he passes by Asriel and cringes from Truth Teller. Quote, "One day I realized Asriel would use that blade on Mor's father and take a long, long while to carve him up." Question for you, Lex, before we get back to throne scene debauchery. Do you think that Asriel is going to kill Kier? Or I guess who do you think is going to kill Kier? Because there is no way Kier is making it out of the series alive. I think we can all agree on that.
I'm honestly surprised he is still alive. I was going to say Asriel because even though he's getting over more by where the series leaves off, I still think that there is, of course, that fierce loyalty and love in more of a platonic way that will ultimately drive him to kill Kier. Or, just throwing out a crazy one, it could be Eris for a reason tied to the mystery around his side of the story. Maybe. Although, I'll be honest, it feels like it would be Asriel's kill.
Interesting. I'm kind of team Mor gets to kill her father. I don't think it's going to be Asriel. I don't know. If Asriel kills Mor's father, I just feel like that's just, yes, I know he's got so much pent up anger, but it's on behalf of Mor, where I'm like, Mor deserves that kill, I feel like. Some very like Shakespearean killing your own father.
But I also don't see her specifically wanting to personally kill him. Like she's even said like, maybe I'll make it a winter solstice gift for Asriel one of these days.
That's true.
So I could see it almost being a way of closing the loop on their love story where it really signifies that yes, they do still have this fierce loyal and love for each other, but it is not in that same wanting kind of way.
Okay, that's fair. Rhys demands for the report from Kier, and one of his hands moves from her waist to her ribs. Rhys gives a dismissive nod to his inner circle, giving Asriel, swiper no swiping, the green light to go and steal the orb. However, Kier tells him that it's been quite quiet, and no one's really in need of punishing in the Hewn City. I do have a headcanon that Kier is so power hungry that there are people who have been acting out of turn, but he punishes them himself. Like he wants to always keep that punishment on his own. So basically he pretends to be like, not the High Lord, but tends to be like of that same status, or at least rules as if he is one while Rhys is gone. Rhys mentions that it's a pity that he'll have no one to punish. And all of this, by the way, is as Rhys is biting Feyre's earlobe and she's leaning back into his touch as he goes higher and higher on her thigh. I remember reading the scene for the first time. My mouth was just like agape. I was like, oh my God, this is wild. Kier continues to give the report, and Feyre is not paying attention. And let's be honest, neither are we. Her focus is laser sharp on Rhysand's touch and on the people watching and judging them on this throne, literally feeling each other up. But she's not feeling ashamed or embarrassed, and she's actually instead daring them to look. This is the Slytherin Feyre on full display here. Finally, Kier caves and he's like, I can't talk about management anymore. What are you doing? And mentions instead that he did not believe the rumors that, quote, Tamlin's pet is now owned by another master. Honestly, the rumor mill has been working overtime in Prythian. Like Kier and the rest of the Quarter Nightmares, they don't really leave under the mountain very often. So it would take a scandal. I've been watching a lot of Bridgerton, if you can't tell, to make this news come all the way up here under this mountain. That shows just how big of a deal this is in Prythian. You just had a thought. What's up?
No, I respectfully disagree. I think that yes, they are kind of like in their own area here, but they still are very connected, like especially to the Autumn Court, for instance.
Okay, that's a fair point. I do think that because it is stated that they don't really leave under the mountain very often, if at all.
Yes.
So I wonder if it's like trade that brings secrets in, because like how would they get the news? They don't.
Well,
have
I think
Twitter.
that they still just have their own alliances. Remember, Kier has his own agenda.
That's true.
And the Court of Nightmares kind of rules itself. And I do think that does go hand in hand with relationships with the other courts as well.
That's true. So after Kier goes on to say how Rhys clearly enjoys putting Feyre in cobwebs and crowns, which again, it does make me wonder, was Kier under the mountain with Amarantha?
Yes, I don't think it's ever outright said. I can't remember. Maybe it was. But I do believe it is definitely safe to say that he was under the mountain. Remember that most of Rhys's Court of Nightmares was in attendance at the party that ensnared them all. And Kier would definitely be part of that as like the head guy, right? So I do think that he would also be left alive because remember, Amarantha killed half of them just to prove that she could because he was of such high nobility.
That makes sense. But Fae-vorite says in a voice that belongs to another woman, quote, "Perhaps I'll put a leash on you." Fuck yeah, Fae-vorite. Love this. Which results in a approval mental shields tap from Rhys. He's like, nah, good job. Again, this is Fae-vorite.
Sorry, my daughter loves to go knock.
So cute. Oh my God, I love her. Again, this is Fae-vorite just adding to that high lady resume. She is standing up. She's not letting Rhys talk to Kier only. She is standing up to Kier as well. But again, this is showing how far she's come and how naturally I do believe this mask falls on her. This mask comes to her. Again, Slytherin Fae-vorite, is that you?
I got to admit, I always giggle at this line. It feels so cheesy.
Really?
Yes. Like, Fae-vorite may be wearing a mask and playing a specific role, but she's able to say what she wants. So like you were just saying, like that's really the key here. This isn't the summer court with the political game of word chess. This is far more straightforward. And Fae-vorite is a more straightforward kind of person. Usually. So yes, that Slytherin in her is coming out. Oh, someone says that she's a pet now owned by another master. Well, guess what? She doesn't have to grind her teeth and bear what he says because here she can be cruel and tap into whatever the F she wants to say to Kier.
Rhys demands for Kier to get her some wine, and with Kier gone, let's kick this up to NC-17. Neither of them breaking their masks, Rhys gives her a small apology/gratitude kiss beneath her ear. Fae-vorite turns to him, wondering if there's anything Rhys wouldn't do for this mission, and wonders if he really doesn't think much of his own worth at all. I'm pointing this out here because we will be touching a lot on this in the next chapter. So Fae-vorite says down their bond, quote, "You are good, Rhys. You are kind. This mask does not scare me. I see you beneath it." And his hands tighten on her. How long has he been waiting for someone to say this to him? How many nights under the mountain did he wish she knew enough about him to say this thing to him, to know the real him? She is finally saying, though, that she does and that she trusts him. But that's not all that she does that he's been hoping for. She parts her legs further and says down their bond, "Why'd you stop?" I love it. Resulting in a primal growl from Rhys, and his touch moves from her ribs to the underside of her breasts.
"It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes."
I think that you're just going to pipe in with 2000s bangers that we grinded in middle school too.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, please never stop. As Fae-vorite's head drops back, quote, "I let go of the part of me that heard their words. Whore, whore. Let go of the part that said those words alongside them. Traitor, liar, whore. And I just became." This whole book, Fae-vorite has been haunted by these titles that those call her and the ones that she calls herself, from Cursebreaker to liar to traitor. This line, "and I just became," is Fae-vorite's fully accepting of herself. Not as a name, not as a title, but who she is and what she feels in this moment. She's coming alive in this moment, literally. And she's realizing this. What's ironic is that she's realizing this in a scene where she's donning a mask wholly unlike herself. Mostly unlike herself, I'll say. Because the person who is at her side knows her for who she is at her core. So she becomes the throbbing music, the ancient drums, the wild, dark thing in the High Lord's arms. And she begins finally touching him now for the first time. Again, touch watch. It's in full swing here. Dragging a hand down his thigh, and it almost sets her aflame. Quote, "I had been so cold, so lonely for so long, and my body cried out at the contact, at the joy of being touched and held and alive." There's that word again, alive. This goes way back to her, just leaving the spring court. Fae-vorite started feeling really lonely under the mountain. She was locked in a cell. She was starved for the man she was risking everything for. And then when it finally, got to the closet scene, it was carnal, but it was short-lived. But even back in the spring court where everything was fine and hunky-dory and dandy, she didn't have a partner. She didn't have a friend. She had someone who, yes, they fucked, but they were never sharing intimacy with each other.
Exactly. Sex with Tamlin back in the spring court was an escape, a way for her to feel anything because she was so empty and lonely. It was a very short-lived band-aid over the hole in her chest, and it didn't fulfill her emotionally. Like you were saying, they weren't really sharing intimacy with each other. Sex was the only thing that really did work for the two of them. It was everything else that was the problem, as she said. And yeah, that's going to blend into the intimacy and their connection on every level.
Now here she is. She's sitting on a male's lap who she's had much sexual tension build up with Rhys like crazy. And she's slowly becoming more and more alive. And again, it's with the aid of her friend and her confidant. Someone she can trust fully and that she shares a common goal with. They're playing out this common goal right now. And again, she's finally getting to feel alive. However, Feyre knows that the evidence of her aliveness would be known to Rhys if he slid his fingers just a little bit too high. So she attempts to move her hips away, only to learn that his aliveness is poking against her backside.
His penis.
Just want to point out, are we forgetting that these Fae have a heightened sense of smell? They know when someone's feeling extra alive or when someone is extra dead and spends 3 months on a fucking wall. Never forget you Claire better. If you have not listened to our ACOTAR Book 1 coverage, that would not make a lot of sense.
I can't believe you just found a way to bring up Claire better during the throne scene. Oh my God. But also, don't forget, as Feyre will be leaving, she realizes the crowd is sniffing her at what was so clearly written all over her body.
Bye. Now Kier, meanwhile, has been just waiting with Feyre's wine, watching as Feyre licks a clean column up Rhys's throat. You can almost hear Kier going, "Youths."
Again, the point of this performance and Feyre's role here as Rhys's pet is to do exactly what they're succeeding in doing: distract Kier. He rules the Hewn City and hates Rhys's visits, but this is like Rhys rubbing in his face that he's the boss and can do whatever the fuck he wants. I just love how Rhys thinks into Feyre's mind. I think he's so disgusted that he might have given me the orb just to get out of here. Kier hates how Rhys is belittling him, showing him who's in charge right now by practically ignoring him and playing with his pet. They're just like licking each other. Like,
the Yoshi help. Kier is praying for the mother to spare him. Rhys's hand slides a little too high, and all of his focus goes straight between her legs. And right as her face begins to burn, quote, "perhaps a bit of shame, but..." Again, these characters not finishing their fucking sentences. Feyre, but what?
Well, I think that's part of it. She doesn't quite know but what. A little from shame, but she always in her bones knows that this is right, that this feeling of being alive isn't something to feel ashamed about. And she can admit and not admit it at the same time. When they start arguing later after the scene, she'll admit she doesn't know what she wants. But the truth is, she does. She's just afraid to admit it to herself.
Feyre needs our love letters to smut from Fourth Wing. That's what she needs. Rhys says into her mind, sounding breathless, it's, quote, "it's fine. It means nothing. It's just your body reacting." I saw an Instagram video way back. This is long before Fantasy Fangirls even happened. That said, Rhys says this into Feyre's mind because this is what he told himself when he would get hard for Amarantha. And that made my heart crack the fuck open. But this is obviously a very different circumstance. Feyre very much feels the evidence of his arousal, first and foremost. But again, this is them dancing around the fact that they do have a safety net. They are playing a role. And when it comes to literally him feeling her aliveness again, it's, don't worry, it's just the parts we're playing. It's saying, you don't feel shamed. It's the underlying of, we're just acting, right? It's getting to call their sexual attention here just a mask. Though something shifts in this moment for Feyre, thinking about how she has another male's hands when, quote, "Tamlin and I were barely..." She has been in the Night Court for 2 months. She has recently sent the "we've broken up" letter to Tamlin. But Tamlin and Feyre have been over for a long time. They've been distancing themselves for, I'd say, even longer than a long time. Feyre feels so much guilt about moving on, quote, too quickly. And unfortunately, this is not unique to our fantasy story. If a person in our own culture jumps from relationship to person, there's unfortunately a stigma around it. But people don't know their story. They don't know how long ago they fell out of love with that person or how long it was before it was, quote, officially over.
Feyre is getting caught up in all the shoulds of how she should feel, when in reality, there is no rule book to this. Both in our own culture, there shouldn't be a rule book to it, and of course in our story here as well. But she is holding herself to this standard because she feels like there is a rule book to follow and she is breaking it.
Yeah. Rhys, however, will soon paste a sex-addled expression on his face, and Feyre sees shadows underneath his eyes. Quote, maybe for all our teasing, after Amarantha, he didn't even enjoy being wanted like that. Personally, I think the shadows in his eyes are because he felt her pull away and started second-guessing everything. And as a result, he started second-guessing everything she was doing with him on this throne, wondering if she was regretting this move, just as she is doing here. Feyre doesn't have a chance to become even more alive on this throne scene, though, because Asriel, Swiper No Swiping, has returned with the orb. It is time to go!
The Inner Circle, wait, what do you mean also by the Asriel Swiper No Swiping?
Have you never watched Dora the Explorer? Swiper No Swiping!
I guess not. Okay, sorry.
We watched very different TV shows growing up, apparently.
We sure did. All right, the Inner Circle all knows their roles here, knows what game to play. Moore slides up to Asriel and he squeezes her waist. Between them, it's the confirmation she needs that he retrieved the orb. But their interaction here will no doubt spread rumors around the Hewn City. Can't forget that Moore lost her virginity to Cassian and Illyrian. And obviously, Kier and the Hewn City nobility look down on that big time. Their interaction here is also a cover-up, making it seem like Asriel has been around this whole time. No one will remember that he wasn't around for a short while, but rather they'll focus on what did happen when he was here. And it's brilliant that they do this toward the end, playing up the law of recency, where they will remember when he was present and forget that he wasn't for a short time. Also, gotta love how Rhys is messing with Kier. Should I test it for poison, about his wine, to help Feyre get out of there without drawing too much attention? Because it's not like she can just pop up from his lap and be like, okay, I gotta go, bye!
As Feyre is walking towards Cassian, Kier, who has just been on a useless task from Rhysand, just to point out how powerless he is, he acts out of anger at his High Lord, hissing under his breath, quote, you'll get what's coming to you, whore, talking to Feyre. And night explodes around the room, clearing to show Rhys lounging on the throne and Kier on his knees. For years, Rhys was called whore behind his back and even to his face from Lucian last book. He wore a mask of Amarantha's whore to protect his city, his people, his family. He would do anything to protect those he loves. Have we mentioned that enough? And now someone is calling his mate a hateful slur, one that he knows the sting of quite intimately.
Feyre playing the part of his pet, his whore, so to speak, is one thing. But for the threat to come directly from someone that Rhys detests, nope, that's taken it way too far. We'll get into this more shortly, but his protective instincts have taken over. No one threatens Feyre like that or calls her a whore, especially not the likes of fucking Kier.
Demanding that Kier apologizes, Rhys cracks Kier's arm into 4 different pieces. Yikes. To which Kier then finally apologizes. Rhys tells Kier that he's not allowed to see a healer when he wakes from his injury. And it looks like Feyre Darling, despite being shaken in this moment, took notes on this particular part of mind work because she will crush Ianthe's hand next book, demanding a very similar post-injury order.
In this moment, though, it's hard for Feyre to keep her mask on because her stomach is churning from seeing Kier break like this. Literally break. Yes, she wants him to die a slow and painful death for what he did to Moore, like the rest of the Inner Circle wants. But she's still got a mortal heart, and this is someone being tormented and hurt because of her. Even if it's deserved, it's hard for her to watch and stomach. Which, quick pause, Rhys is using his powers when we know for a fact that he is being tracked. I think that the best answer is that there are wards around the Hewn City that prevent the tracker signaling to Hybern's forces. Or perhaps the more likely scenario even is that the tracker is going off, but there's no way they're infiltrating the Hewn City. They can only ambush when he's out in the open and vulnerable to attack.
Well, right before the attack on Valaris, he is in the Hewn City. And Amryn says this exact reasoning. She says that he does have a tracker on his power, but there's no way they would attack on the Hewn City because they're not idiots.
Yeah.
Leaving the Court of Nightmares, though, Rhys, instead of winnowing them to the townhouse, instead heads to a mountain lake. Oh, God.
I'm sorry, I do have to point out again that he is using his powers when there is a tracker on him. And in this instance, they are out in the open. I assume that they leave this mountain lake too soon before Hybern attackers can arrive. And that's why there's no ash arrows zooming their way. But if they had waited even a few minutes longer, they probably would have gotten attacked. Also, why not go right back to Valaris? Well, there's a few reasons. For one, Rhys needs to cool down after that encounter with Kier, and he needs some privacy with Feyre before going back to the Inner Circle's questions and jumping back into game plan mode. He loves his friends, and of course, they are supportive of one another. And yet, Rhys needs to keep some privacy, as we saw on full display earlier in the stretch of chapters with his nightmares. He feels the need to hide his deepest, most vulnerable emotions. Only Feyre gets to see that side of him, all of him. But also, switching between these roles as cruel High Lord of the Court of Nightmares and the peaceful High Lord of the Court of Dreams isn't so simple. Remember, think about it this way. We all need to transition, like from our work day into home life. And that's another reason why he's here. He doesn't want to take that remnants of that mask back to Valaris. He doesn't want to take his anger at Kier back to Valaris, his safe haven and his home. He absolutely likes to keep these things separate, and that's exactly what he's achieving here by winnowing them to a mountain lake versus the town home. Upon arriving here, Rhys immediately apologizes, and he's shaking. He regrets that Feyre saw this monstrous side of him. And at the same time, he realizes that if she plans on staying, which she's confirmed she wants to do, he can't shield her forever from this side of him. He doesn't like how he had to use her in this instance. Even if she agreed to it, even if she felt in control of the situation, he hated putting her in this position in the first place. He didn't like this plan from the beginning, but did what he had to do, meaning bringing Feyre to the Court of Nightmares and objectifying her like that, because that's what they do. This was for the greater good. This was for distracting Kier and the others so that they could steal the orb. And now Rhys is beating himself up because now that it's all said and done and the aftermath led to Feyre being called a whore and threatened, he can't see that same greater good for the mission right now. He feels like the cost was too high. And understandably, it makes things escalate here, which, by the way, you know it's good dialogue when such an escalation happens so naturally and realistically. Like, they went from like almost like getting it on right there in front of everybody to literally not speaking to each other in a matter of 2 hours. Like, yeah.
Let's take a moment and start this ensuing argument by looking at both point of views. Let's start with Rhys. Rhys, having just showed immense primal male dominance for really the first time since we've met him, is terrified that she is going to view him as a monster again. Because who do we associate rage and primal dominance with? Tamlin. However, unlike when Tamlin was in a rage, he was out of control, wild, panting. Rhys, the entire time, was calm rage. He was never not in control in that moment. Now, why did Rhys show this rage in the first place? As he says, quote, "It's hard to shut down my instincts." His mate was being verbally attacked, and he went straight into protection mate mode.
He is protective of her, not in a lock you up way, but in a I will kill anyone for you way. And there's a big difference between these two love-driven protections, but it can seem like a fine line in instances like this.
Well, one is trusting that their person can handle themselves and one is not. One is saying, I'm going to lock you up because you can't handle yourself. And the other is saying, I'm going to just kill this person because they're fucking with you. Like that is a big difference. As Rhys says, quote, "I will kill anyone who harms you. I will kill them and take a damn long time doing it. Go ahead, hate me, despise me for it." Again, we have to look at this through the mate's POV because it does all make sense. But from Feyre still recovering from Tamlin, who had, like we said, a similar air of protectiveness, although it was very different as we just stated, Rhys fears that she will start looking at him in the same way as Tamlin. And what happened after Tamlin got very primal rage and destroyed the study? She completely withered away.
Yep, that was truly the beginning of the end when Feyre just shut down and started going through the motions of their relationship.
After Rhys tells her to stop comparing him to Tamlin, which honestly, I will say is a fair ask in my opinion. When you are a partner of someone, the last thing you want is for them to compare you to their ex. Like that's not ever what you want. So I do think that is a fair moment. Rhys says a line that I've quoted probably just as much as I've quoted chapter 54 at this point. He says, quote, "You think I don't know how stories get written, how this story will be written? I am the dark lord who stole away the bride of spring. I am a demon and a nightmare, and I will meet a bad end. He is the golden prince, the hero who will get to keep you as his reward for not dying of stupidity and arrogance." Get it, Rhys. Rhys is terrified that she will view him like Tamlin because of this exact reason. Plus, I also imagine that a moment where he sees her comparing him to Tamlin in her eyes. He knows that's what she's thinking. That would be monumentally hurtful, especially when he's not acting in a way that is, in my opinion, even remotely similar to Tamlin, at least not at the core.
Well, and also, Rhys is someone who generally does not care about what others think. Remember back to, well, yes, he was upset about Tarquin. He did what he had to do, and he would have done it again. But in this instance, he recognizes what everybody is going to say about his story. And in this way, it's really hard for him to stomach that because he is being compared by all of Prythian to Tamlin. And it's not where it's just like, okay, I'm fine with my own loved ones. Like all I care about is protecting them. No, this is entirely different. This is not him self-sacrificing for Feyre and for the protection of her. This is him living his life and feeling like Tamlin is once again getting handed the reward, or so to speak, even if that reward is the good reputation.
Yes. And let us remember this line that he said to Feyre, he meaning Rhysand said to Feyre under the mountain, quote, "The things I love have a tendency to be taken away from me." We've talked about Rhys's POV and all this kind of stuff, but this is the true fear. This is where that anger, that protectiveness is really, truly coming from. He finally, for once in his life, has someone who makes him happy, alive, who is his mate, who he loves deeply. Yes, he loves his family, but Feyre is obviously very different. This is the closest moment he has had to losing her since she's come to the Night Court, and it terrifies him. So yeah, he does act out in anger in this moment. Just again, it's a very human thing to do, which speaking of which, let's move to Feyre's POV. Feyre hearing Rhysand apologize for taking her to the Court of Nightmares is terrifying to her because what does she immediately think of? Getting shut out. Him stopping her making her own choices, or he's going to start protecting her like Tamlin did, like he just showed at the drop of a hat. Although, again, those were two different types of protection. At the end of the day, again, it was Feyre's choice to go. She is finally getting used to having choices for her own damn life again. One of the reasons she gets so angry at him is because she does worry that choice is fleeting for her and that this showing of primal male rage, again, something we associate with another high lord taking away from her, is going to be taken away, and that animosity over her own life. As Rhys tells her that he will kill anyone who harms her, she tells him, "You are my friend," and begins to cry, not knowing if these tears are from what felt like realness of what they had on the throne. And she's now wondering if, oh my gosh, was that actually all just a show? It's funny because that was their safety net a second ago, but now it is heartbreaking for her.
But what Feyre fears is not Rhysand being like Tamlin, but that he will start protecting her, not hurting her. Rhys has honestly not been very protective. Like, again, we can't forget the Weaver. So this behavior from him, this "I will kill anyone," it is a little bit jarring to her and very different from what she's seen so far. And I am getting some serious mixed signals from you, dude.
This fight comes to blows with Rhys asking Feyre what is it that she wants. And the truth is, she wants him, but she will not admit it to anyone, specifically herself yet. So she stays silent.
She's stuck between regaining her independence and learning about herself and being so intertwined with these high lords, both Rhysand and with Tamlin. She subconsciously knows what she wants, like you said, but she can't admit it to herself because it's not, again, what she should want. I'm using that should language so much here because it's really weighing on her.
Rhys snickers and says, quote, "I thought so. Perhaps you should take some time and figure that out one of these days." Which, woof. I know he's mad. I know he knows that she wants him, but isn't ready to say it. And all of that said, this is a low blow from our guy Rhys. But the words can hurt bar plummets to the floor with Feyre seething at him, saying, quote, and I'm quoting the whole damn thing, Perhaps I don't know what I want, but at least I don't hide what I am behind a mask. At least I let them see who I am, broken bits and all. Yes, it's to save your people, but what about the other masks, Rhys? What about letting your friends see your real face? But maybe it's easier not to, because what if you did let someone in? And what if they saw everything and still walked away? Who could blame them? Who would want to bother with that sort of mess?
Oh dear.
Ouch. Literally one chapter ago. Yeah, that's twist the knife, girl. Literally one chapter ago, Feyre was looking into his face past the mask of the Court of Nightmares and saying into his mind that she sees him and he does not scare her. And now she throws this in his face. Right after wondering what Rhys wouldn't do to help Azriel secure the orb back in the Court of Nightmares, she also wondered if perhaps the arrogance and swagger, if they all masked a male who perhaps thought he wasn't worth very much at all. She knows he doesn't have a high sense of self-worth, knows that the reason he throws himself into the line of fire is because he believes he doesn't deserve the happiness and love that his family and Feyre has to offer him. And she knows that in this moment, she is talking much more about herself than she is talking about Rhys.
She's projecting her own insecurities, her own messy self onto him here as a defensive tactic. And as much of an L as it is, which it is, it's also relatable to so many of us. Feyre, like many other SJM characters, is not perfect. We were talking about this with Rhys just earlier this episode. She makes mistakes. She says things that she does not mean in the heat of the moment, which is relatable. It's human. Or Fae in this case, but you know what I mean.
She will later acknowledge that she knows him and Tamlin's protectiveness are very different, and that if Rhys was in a similar position as she was, she would have made the same choices and acted very similarly. But in this anger, she forgot all of these things. So yes, like Lexi said, this is very human, but this is still an L. His mate just threw his number one insecurity in his face in anger. And in a few chapters, Feyre will learn that her and Rhys are mates and react in very much anger despite already having fallen in love with him. Yes, there's a lot more to it, and I'm salivating to get to that. I can't believe it's next week. Wow. But Feyre has a tendency to be reactive, to act in anger and not see the bigger picture in those moments and instead say words that hurt. And here she knows quite literally immediately that she done fucked up because Rhys flinches. Quote, "The most powerful High Lord in history flinched, and I knew I'd hit hard and deep. Too hard, too deep." So Rhys, with only a few words to her, winnows them to Velaris.
He uses the word home, and that word hangs between them. Feyre waits for her own mouth to bark back that this isn't home like she's done before. But the thing is, Velaris is becoming her home. We've seen small, subtle descriptions about how much Feyre has come to cherish Velaris and find comfort in the city.
As they winnow, quote, "the darkness cold and foreign." The darkness has become such a warmth for Feyre, peace even, especially as she's been mastering it as her own power. But now this cold, it feels unfamiliar. And it just shows that there has been so much warmth in her with growing with Rhysand.
Yes, and it also speaks directly just to the current state of her and Rhysand's relationship. By the way, she's back to calling him Rhysand right now, which is a telltale sign.
And as they're back in the townhome, she goes straight to the garden, unconsciously waiting for him to come to her. But in this moment, she realizes something. Rhys wouldn't be mad, angry, or call her a whore if she wanted him. Nor would any of the inner circle, not when they've all been called worse and lived and loved despite of it. Quote, "So maybe it was time to tell Rhys that, to explain that I didn't want to pretend. I didn't want to write it off as a joke or a plan or a distraction." She realizes she's officially ready to try to have some kind of relationship with Rhys. Quote, "to try to be something."
This is a really big realization for Feyre. I've talked a lot about all of her guilt or about how she should be feeling, but here she is owning what she really does feel. Does she love Rhys and want to be with him in that way? Not yet. But she's dropping that push and pull of immense guilt and shame for flirting, for feeling alive in his presence. And instead, she's willing to own that this is how she feels, and she's willing, for the first time really, to fully lean into it without the perceived repercussions weighing on her. And it's when she's realizing all of this and gaining this clarity, that's when she goes back to calling him Rhys.
But Rhys, isn't exactly there yet, because attempting to talk to him, Feyre writes him many letters that, in our Prithian texting, they normally disappear. These ones do not. These letters range from to the point, quote, I want to talk to you, to the joking, if you've moved elsewhere, you could have at least given me the keys so people don't break into the townhouse, to the playful dig old tactic. Cassian says you're sulking about the House of Wind. What unhigh lord-like behavior? What of my training? All of which that blue text bubble never says read, aka the note never disappears, until a rather angry note, which is, quote, is this punishment, or do people in your inner circle not get second chances if they piss you off? You're a hateful coward. Not the tactic I would have used, Feyre, because of course, that one he reads.
Okay, two things. One is relatable.
Really?
Like when you're trying that hard, when you're putting your heart out there, when you're trying and they just are not there, like she's looking for a reaction out of him. And part of that is fueled from her own frustrations that she's trying and he's not. She's just going up against a brick wall. So what does she do? She essentially punches through that brick wall.
Okay, that'll give you.
Now, I have to point out, when the message does disappear, that means that he's using his powers. And we know that he is flying around trying to figure out where their attackers are. So I don't have an answer for that. But again, we're going to start pointing out when he's using his powers, and he uses powers then. Feyre returns to Amren's apartment, and I love her way of greeting. Ah, the reason why Rhys bit my head off this morning. Showing that he is very much still pissed. But aha, here is where we officially learn that it seems their enemy has a track on Rhys's power. He's away trying to hunt them, like we were just saying. And in 2 days, not one, but two, several of them, including Feyre, are leaving Velaris to go to one of the Illyrian war camps, where they'll wait to then fly to the human lands once the queens agree to meet with them again now that they have the orb. Why not today? Feyre asks. Well, because tomorrow is Starfall, which is actually really fun as I say this, because during this recording, tomorrow Nicole and I are going to a Starfall ball. Oh my God, I can't wait to get to Starfall, both tomorrow's and our episode recording next week. We'll hold off on all of that around Starfall until next episode, but for now, all we know is that it is a celebration only in the Night Court on the same day that everyone else in Prythian celebrates Ninsar, the Day of Seeds and Flowers. Basically, it's to celebrate spring is here. And again, we get this little hint that Velaris is becoming Feyre's home because she's sad at the idea that they won't return for a long time. The conversation with Amren shifts back to Rhys, but it's a more intimate, vulnerable discussion than we usually hear from Amren, which, means that it's really counts here. She shares that he was a ghost after Amarantha, which we understand how deeply the trauma he endured for those 50 years affected him, but Feyre has made him come alive again, which only makes Feyre feel worse about the things she said to him. But this language about him coming alive, we've discussed it at length about Feyre and her healing journey. It's so representative of their dual paths here. Not only is she coming alive and she healing, but so is he. He has also come alive because of her. Yes, they are individually healing, but they're doing it together, side by side, and supporting and helping one another on this path toward healing. They make each other come alive. They tap into their own identities and discover happiness and wholeness once again, both separately and together. And that's what really makes it a healthy relationship. And then we get this beautiful line from Amren, quote, "No, we are lucky to have him, Feyre." This holds extra weight coming from Amren, who is not one to dish out compliments willy-nilly. When she says this, she means it with her whole immortal soul. She goes on to say what we've learned about Rhys, how he's a dreamer who wants peace and freedom in a world united. He wants something better for all of them. And that is truly a leader that they are lucky to have. Even if he's messy, even if he's not perfect, he is still good in his heart, and that transpires to his inner circle, to his people, to his home. The comparisons with Tamlin come really full circle here, as Feyre makes the distinguishing statement that Rhys is the one who let her out of her cage, and the villain, Tamlin, was the one who locked her up. Even when they were angry at each other, even when they were playing their roles, Rhys gave her freedom to be who she wants to be. But we'll have to wait for Starfall for them to make up, which, again, I can't wait for next episode. While we already highlighted key foreshadowing moments, let's turn our full attention onto foreshadowing to the rest of this book and other important moments in the series. I'll go first. Feyre wonders if Cassian and Varian might need to compare notes, based on the fact that neither of them seem able to decide if they hate or want to bone Nesta and Amren, respectively. And I don't know if they ever do compare notes, but they do both end up with their respective females. So, you know what? I bet they do have some hilarious conversations. I love to be a fly on the wall as they discuss Nesta and Amren.
That does make me think, do we ever know if Amren, if she can have a mate or if she does have a mate? I don't think we ever learned that.
I don't think we do.
That's something to ponder. Another foreshadowing moment. The queens mention how their sixth is unwell and couldn't make the journey to see them. Unwell, you sold her to Coast J and now she's a firebird by day. Potato, potato. When talking about Jurian, Miriam, and Draken's backstory, Cassian mentions how they might need to call upon Draken's aerial army by the end. They will try, but unfortunately the glamour will work too well on Kratea. But thank goodness for Deus Ex Machina, because they will swoop in and help our pals in the big war. And last but not least, Amren mentions that Starfall, which we get to do next episode. If you hadn't heard us already say that, we're so excited. Our crew will not be returning to Valaris for a while. And Feyre assumes that means a long time. Well, it's sooner than we think it will be, but Feyre will come back a completely different person with a mate. Yay! Now, it is time to sip some tea with the Suriel. Every episode, Lexi will take some time, sit down, sip some tea with the Suriel, and walk us through a world-building topic to help us better understand this world and the people, specifically this episode, the people in it.
Today's Suriel topic is, as I mentioned earlier, the Mortal Queens. There are 6 queens that rule over the mortal lands, specifically on the continent. Remember that the mortal lands are below the wall that divides the Fae and humans. The mortals were given this realm 500 years ago after the Fae and the mortal queens of the time signed the treaty. The treaty established the wall that would divide the fairy kingdoms from the mortal lands so each could live separately from the other. Learn more about the treaty and the Fae/human history in our very first ACOTAR episode 1, or watch the newly posted standalone video on YouTube. The queens were also given 1/2 of the Book of Breathings to guard in their palace by the sea on the continent, since it explained how to nullify the power of the Cauldron, which could be used to destroy the wall. The Cauldron was lost to time, so the Book of Breathings was more of a symbolic nature. But all the same, the mortal queens at the time of the war were crafty and used Fae to spell the book, to bind it so that if it was ever stolen or magic of any kind was used to trick them into giving the book would melt into ore and be lost to time. Their half of the book must be given freely by a mortal queen with no trickery or magic involved. So you can imagine how well they safeguard their half of the book even 500 years later. Before this meeting at the Archeron house, the King of Hybern had already contacted the queens by sending Jurian in as his representative. I'm getting a little bit repetitive here from earlier, but some other key information. The King of Hybern realized the Night Court was after the 2 halves of the Book of Breathings after they took the Summer Court book. So that's when he sent Jurian to them to warn them of how dangerous the Night Court is and that they shouldn't give them the book. He promised the queens power, protection, and immortal youth. 5, or seemingly 5 of them, but actually 4, maybe, ate it up and agreed to work with the King of Hybern as they sought this eternal youth. But Vasa, the 6th queen, saw through Jurian's lies about the King of Hybern and voiced that they should raise their armies against him instead. So what do the other queens do? They took her out of the picture and put out the story that the 6th queen was ill. More on this in a moment. The mortal queen's courts cannot be infiltrated. Why? Because we will learn at the end of ACOMAF that the King of Hybern used his powers to ensconce their court from prying eyes, just to show them the benefit of allying with Hybern. AKA, this is apparently why Azriel was unable to infiltrate their courts, because Hybern's magic prevented it. Though Azriel says it is because it was built by Fae hands to protect the humans from Fae. Could the answer be both? Where, yes, their palaces could have been built by Fae to protect them, but the real reason it is absolutely impenetrable is because Hybern is using his powers to heighten that security tenfold. The ACOTAR series references the Mortal Queen's palace and then also says their courts, so it uses singular and plural kind of interchangeably. So my best guess is that yes, they each rule over a human territory, which are their individual courts, but then they all collectively have a palace, headquarters for the Mortal Queens, if you will. Separate from the King of Hybern, these mortal queens have the magical ability to winnow. This gift was given to them by the Fae after the war, and they guard it with great secrecy. Like I said earlier, we can assume that this power is passed down through their descendants. But alas, this bit of magic is not enough for the present-day queens, because 4 of the 6 queens wish for immortality and eternal youth, to the point where they will work with Hybern to achieve that by stepping into the cauldron to be made. Or one of them steps into the cauldron and things don't end up well, but we're not going to quite cover all of that here. Let's go through what we know about each of the current mortal queens. We have Brialyn. She is the youngest queen in her early to mid-20s. She has black hair and black eyes, and she is described as having, quote, careful cunning oozing from her every pore. Lovely. Brialyn is the mortal queen who will eagerly go into the cauldron after Nesta, but she will, unfortunately, but kind of fortunately because she sucks, be transformed into an old Fae crone. This is also the queen who will be, I'll call it the big bad in Silver Flames. We'll get more into her later into our series deep dive, but there's a super brief version. Then we have Demetra. She is the second youngest and most beautiful queen, no older than 30. In fact, she is considered the only beautiful queen. The other ones, not so much. She has curly golden hair, amber and brown eyes, and freckled golden skin. She's described as a lion in human flesh. She is one of the 2 main queens who speak at this meeting, and one of the 2 who will attend the second meeting. So safe to say she is one of the, I'll call it primary queen representatives. Demetra is also the queen that will sneaky give the Night Court their half of the Book of Breathings, but will then be sadly tortured and killed by the Adder in a similar way that poor Claire Better was. Demetra is a descendant of Andromanche, one of the human queens from the war who signed the treaty. Andromanche and Moore were in love, but Andromanche, she was a queen who needed to continue the royal line, so Moore went home and was unable to cross the wall afterward to try to be with her again. She went on to get married and have 5 children, dying an old woman safe in her bed. Demetra, the golden hair queen in our present day, has Andromanche's same spirit, and Moore sees her in her old lover. Then we have the 2 middle-aged queens, names unknown, who are each other's opposites in appearance and personality. One of these queens wears white, has fair skin, and a face hewn from granite. She frowns often. The other of these middle-aged queens wears black, has dark skin, and a sweet face. She smiles often. Both of these queens wear matching silver rings, and Feyre wonders if the rings connect them in other ways. But unfortunately, that's all we can speculate because we have no further information. The eldest queen, named surprisingly also unknown for how much page time she gets, is brown-skinned with sharp, cold eyes and an unbent posture despite her wrinkled face. She leads the charge of these mortal queen meetings along with the Golden Queen and will outright refuse twice to hand over the book. Vasa is the 6th queen who rules over Scathia, a human territory on the continent that is rich in trade and arms. Vasa is a beautiful queen in her mid-20s with freckled golden brown skin, silky reddish gold hair, thick dark lashes, and stunning large up-tilted blue eyes. Much more on her later, but for now, she is absent from these mortal queen meetings. They say she is ill, but here's what really happened. When she disagreed that they should ally with Hybern, the other queens sold her to a Death Lord, Koschei, the Bone Carver and the Weaver's older brother. Koschei cursed her and enslaved her, binding her to a lake in the continent and making her a firebird by day, human by night. And there you have it, friends, the foundational information about the mortal queens. I can't wait to dive more into these histories and series of events as we continue our coverage. There's so much more to explore for when the time comes.
You might call it the gist behind the mortal queens.
The gist behind the mortal queens, I know.
Now it is time to move into our favorite moments. Rhys, knowing that Amren's answer to the blood rubies would have been to go to Adriata and wipe the city off the map. That is some Capricorn vengeance right there, and I freaking love it. Feyre saying, quote, I gave him a few smiles and he handed over a family heirloom. I bet he'd give me the keys to his territory if I showed up wearing those undergarments. I love cocky Feyre. So good.
Someone thinks mighty highly of themselves.
Sleep fair. I love the line from Amren when Feyre brings her blood, mainly because of how Jennifer Ikeda, who voices the audiobook, says it from Amren. She goes, quote, you. Oh, I like you. Like, I just love that.
Cassian saying how the Archerons are all, quote, bossy know-it-all females. Oh, Cassian, you got it bad.
Feyre thinks, quote, Baron's fire began crackling in my veins. My fire, not his. I love, love, love that she is starting to take ownership over her powers and claiming them as her own.
We kind of already mentioned this, but I have to say it again. I just love how Cassian, all of my quotes are always from Cassian here, is like, we could dispose of these queens and get newer, smarter ones on their thrones instead. Oh, just casually dropping that they should assassinate the mortal queens.
And I love how Reese is like, no, that'd take too much time.
Yeah.
And last but not least, when making the official decision that she is going to the Court of Nightmares, she takes Reese's hand and, quote, his thumb brushed against the back of my palm. I tried not to think about the ease of that stroke. Oh, I melt. Alrighty, friends, we are about to begin our Maasverse Madness section. It's a short one today.
If you have not read the Throne of Glass series before you leave, next episode we will be covering chapters 44 through 50. And if you want more Fantasy Fangirls, be sure to join the Patreon party and /or follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Fantasy Fangirls Pod.
Also, do not forget to take a moment and rate and review the podcast. This is one of the best things that you can do for every single podcaster that you listen to. It is literally 3 seconds and it's like giving us a big hug. And then last but not least, and probably most importantly, is to share this episode with your fellow ACOTAR friends. If you and your friends also went feral for the throne scene, this is the one to send to them.
All right. We are now entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode where we call out series crossover references or discuss theories. It's, like Nicole said, a short one for today with spoilers for the Throne of Glass series.
It is time to extend my is more a witch theory. In case you missed it, I, along with our friend Lauren from Book Huddle, went down a rabbit hole around the possibility of Mor being a witch from Tog, specifically a Kraken witch from Tog. If you want to listen to the entire deep dive of the theory, we have it in episode 5's Maasverse Madness section. But it is time to extend that theory with the Veritas Orb. This is full credit to Lauren because she's incredible and she caught this and she texted it to me and my mouth just dropped open. Mor says, quote, this is the Veritas, the gift of my first ancestor to our bloodline. This line, the gift of my first ancestor to our bloodline, implies that the ancestor is different from their current bloodline. Could this be a gift from a Kraken witch bloodline, like we mentioned in episode 5? So the foundation of this Veritas orb is, could this be a witch mirror? Witch mirrors have immense power in the Throne of Glass world and have various uses depending on the mirror in question. Some can see the future, some can see the past, some can see the present, but all witch mirrors are made out of a rare silver. The Veritas orb also made out of silver. So was Mor's family gifted the Veritas orb from her possible witch bloodline? Maybe. The more and more I look into it, I'm like, please God, let this be true. I love this theory so much because I think it would clear up so much of the question marks around Mor. But that's it. Short and sweet. Friends, we're done. Let's get to them finding out their mates. I'm so excited.
Like we mentioned a little bit ago, next episode, we are covering chapters 44 through 50. And then, yes, the episode after that will be chapter 54. Well, technically 51 through 55, but don't worry, we are keeping the focus on chapter 54 and 55 for Nicole.
And 55. Thank you, as always, to our executive producer, Hayden, aka our sanity manager. We freaking love ya.
And if you want to support Nicole and I, help put a roof over our heads, please join the Patreon party. You get so many goodies out of it, including even more community. It is so much fun in there. Go ahead, join the party at patreon.com/fantasyfangirls.
Side note, our book club book for June is Spark of the Everflame. I'm so excited to read it. I cannot wait.
And we have a really big surprise coming for July too. That's all I'll say right now.
Also, sign up for our newsletter. Every single month, we send out a newsletter chock full of goodies, from highlighting a store to telling you what we're obsessed with and what's going on in our lives, to giving you a trivia question, to so much more. The link to sign up is in the show notes.
And if you're not following us on TikTok or Instagram, what are you doing? Give us a follow at Fantasy Fangirls Pod. Like, seriously, what are you doing if you aren't following us on social media? There's so much more content on there. Go follow.
Also, do not forget to rate and review the podcast. Like I said, it's one of the best things you can do, and it takes 5 seconds. But the most important thing out of all of the things we've been saying, share this episode with your fellow ACOTAR friends. If you and your friends also have no idea what the fuck is going on with the Mortal Queens and you didn't know the King of Hybern was already in cahoots with them, this is a great episode to send their way.
All right. Thank you so so much, friends. We will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
6 minutes in and probably only 2 seconds of audio. Thank you, Hayden, for listening to our dentist woes. Oh my gosh.
Picking up right where we left off last episode, our crew has returned to Valaris from their summer court escapades. Wait, escapades. What am I trying to say here?
Both. Honestly, both work. I have so much dry shampoo in my hair that I look like I'm graying at the ripe age of 30. Good stuff. And she reaches out and runs a finger down the inner edge, and Reese comes in his pants. Oh wait, never mind. Sorry. He shuddered because that is very sensitive. Sweet. Welcome to the podcast editing, Hayden.